With the development of information technology, comments have come into human life. Every minute, people all over the world express their opinions in different ways. Someone leaves a comment on a post or a photo. Others share their impressions of a movie or a book. Comments on different kinds of services are especially popular. You have probably encountered them or written them yourself. This mainly concerns the sphere of cosmetology, hairdressing, construction, trade, medicine, and so on. Thanks to the comments, it is easy to understand the specifics of the work, its quality. Another criminal story will surprise you in many ways. In it, senselessness borders on madness. However, you will be surprised even more when you learn that the customer of the crime left a positive feedback for the completed work on the internet. This reaction was a fatal mistake for him and shed light on the investigation. Finding: March 12, 2020, the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee, USA. The bodies of 33-year-old Holly Williams and her ex-boyfriend, 36-year-old William Lanway, were found in a white 2005 Acura sedan. The unexpected find was discovered by a random passerby, a construction worker who was working nearby. The man contacted emergency services and told them what he had seen. When the emergency team arrived on the scene, it turned out that the couple had been shot. No one expected that the 3-year investigation would uncover a number of secrets and expose many vices. But most importantly, the criminals will be caught and severely punished, and their example will serve as a lesson for others. Holly Williams. Holly Ann Williams was born on January 14, 1987, in Nashville. Some friends characterized her as a modest and sweet girl. Others considered free-spirited and willful. Since childhood, the heroine of the story was interested in beautiful things and people. She was an aesthete and saw the beautiful in everything. Therefore, she dreamed of linking her future life with the beauty industry. It must be said that she succeeded in this. In the middle of 2017, Holly graduated from the Georgia Career Institute in Murfreesboro. And already in September of the same year, she received a cosmetologist's license. She later opened her own business called Shine Aesthetics. Her business specialized in makeup, grooming procedures, and eyelash extensions. The girl herself was the face of her salon, beautiful, well-groomed, and personable. Her friend told me that she was really good at what she did. Holly had a lot of admirers, but she chose an eccentric guy named William Lanway. Their relationship was of an amplitude nature. William fell in love with her like a boy, beautifully courted. However, broad gestures of love alternated with jealousy and scandals. As it turned out later, William was a skilled manipulator who knew how to properly apologize and continue the emotional swing further. He resorted to standard techniques, asked for forgiveness, gave gifts and flowers, promised to change. The girl returned to the toxic relationship again and again. The very unstable behavior of the boyfriend could be explained by a difficult childhood and traumas received in the first marriage. However, this does not justify his actions in later life. Bill Lanway. William Lanway, better known as Bill, was born on March 17, 1983, in Clarksville, Montgomery County, Tennessee. The boy spent his first years in the love of his mother and the rest of his relatives. Later, however, a terrible tragedy occurred. At the age of 26, Candy Kay, William's mother, died. At that time, he was 3.5 years old. It is known that her husband, who stabbed his wife almost in front of his son, was responsible for the young woman's untimely departure. Before that, Lyle Lanway threatened to shoot himself and William if his mother did not return on time from the store. Perhaps the man had mental problems or was violently jealous of his wife and lost control of himself. Either way, this event left an indelible mark on Bill. Subsequently, his upbringing was taken up by the closest relatives. He grew up with proper care and protection. In 20 years, the young man married Dana Rucker. 3 years later, the spouses had a long-awaited daughter. Madison Kay did not know the misfortune that her father experienced. Parents loved the little girl, cherished and pampered. However, and this time, fate was merciless. The girl fell seriously ill. She was diagnosed with brain cancer. Unfortunately, the treatment was ineffective, and September 21st, 2011, the baby became an angel. Chetta Lanway could not recover from grief. Gradually, the relationship between the spouses broke down, and they decided to divorce. For a long time, Billy was depressed, withdrawn. However, life went on further, and he needed to accept reality. In everyday life, the man behaved shyly, tried not to show his feelings. However, sometimes he had nervous breakdowns and outbursts of aggression. Billy found an outlet in the work of a mechanic. Friends remembered that pulled him out of a depressed state for a long time, and finally, his new girlfriend did. The vicissitudes of love. At one point, life smiled at Bill. He met Holly Williams. It is worth noting that the character of the man contributed to this. When he visited parties or bars, he became cheerful and sociable. Young people liked each other and quickly began to meet. Everything was good. The lovers spent a lot of time together. However, later their relationship lost its former ease. Bill repeatedly provoked quarrels and raised his hand against his girlfriend. When she realized that it was time to leave, Bill began to manipulate the situation with his daughter from his past. Because of this, the young woman did not leave him, tried to support him. But all patience comes to an end. Holly's desire to break the harmful passion even more provoked Bill. All controversial moments he solved with his fists. Holly was worried for her life. One day after another, conflict occurred. That was the last straw. When Williams returned from work, she found her favorite dog without signs of life. Until that moment, the health of the pet was not in doubt. Therefore, despite the fact that the boyfriend denied his involvement, she decided that it was his doing. Thus, he took revenge on her and threatened her for the future. After that, the young people finally parted. Nevertheless, Bill did not leave her alone, calling and stalking her. On one such day between them, there was another altercation which ended in a showdown in the police. Bill was arrested for aggravated assault as well as kidnapping. Holly got a restraining order against him. However, just a week later, the two were found dead. An accident or a double murder? To a random eyewitness who called the emergency services, it seemed that the car found was involved in a traffic accident. The vehicle was at a construction site in the southwest part of the city. It had apparently rolled onto the curb and hit a tree. The reporting party believed that the people inside were injured in the accident. However, that was not what actually happened. Police noted that the man and woman were in the back seat in an unnatural position. In addition, the couple had gunshot wounds. The marks that were found in the passenger compartment were uncharacteristic of a typical impact in a collision. Also, the victims had no identification or personal belongings on them. When the victims were identified, it came as a surprise to law enforcement officers that they were dealing with a couple that had recently been in police reports. Versions. The first theory put forward by detectives was a crime of passion. It was assumed that Bill killed Holly and then ended his life. However, soon, this version was excluded. When communicating with the close entourage of the couple, confirmed that in recent months, the relationship between them was really heated. Holly even installed reinforced locks and CCTV cameras in the house. When reviewing the footage, it was found that Bill had come to her house more than once, wandering around looking for something. But what he was doing it for was unclear. However, such behavior spoke of the man's fixation and unwillingness to let go of the past. Later found witnesses who claimed that they saw the couple in the evening of March 11th calmly talking to each other. No aggression. At the same time, Bill was not noted. Perhaps their relationship was experiencing a new round, or they decided to keep friendly communication. In any case, the initial assumption of the investigators was dispelled. No murder weapon was found during the examination of the vehicle. If the man killed the woman and then committed suicide, where did the gun go? At the same time, The forensic results established that Bill could not have inflicted such wounds on himself, and every bullet fired was fatal. It looked like someone who knew how to handle firearms was at work. Things like cell phone, documents, and money were found in everyone's house, which means their trip wasn't a long or planned one. Holly and Bill may have been victims of kidnapping and murder. One thing is clear: they were murdered, then stuffed inside the car and then pushed off the side of the road. A third person wanted to stage the accident to cover up another crime, but he didn't do it properly, maybe in a hurry. At the same time, no evidence or fingerprints were found in the car. The investigation suggested another version of what happened was revenge. After the detectives talked to the relatives of the victims, it turned out that because of the fiery temper, Bill has not once got into trouble. It's possible that he had ill-wishers and enemies, and his behavior could have provoked someone to retaliate. But even that hardly explained the death of his ex-girlfriend. She was the complete opposite, calm and peaceful, but at the same time could have been an unwanted witness to something. Investigation. In search of the perpetrator, recent contacts of the victims were studied. The contents of mobile devices and laptops were analyzed. Curious information came to light. The same number was listed in the messengers of both. However, it was not possible to check it at once, which only heightened suspicions. Such numbers are usually used to conceal identity and are often associated with bad purposes. However, this method is not 100% secret, because it leaves a trace that can be detected by an experienced programmer. To identify the owner of the number, the authorities had to turn to the specialists of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In parallel, there was a study of CCTV footage from Holly's house. It turned out that shortly before the tragic events, 3 unknown men broke into her home. All were thoroughly prepared, dressed in black clothes, faces hidden under a mask. It was unclear what they were looking for, as they did not take anything with them. It is worth noting that there were many valuable things in the woman's house. The intruders carefully examined the house, studied it. When they found one of the cameras, they tried to disconnect it. However, apparently they were not afraid of being caught and were confident in their impunity. After they left, Holly returned from work. She noticed the stranger's presence and became very frightened. She barricaded the doors overnight and changed the lock the next day. Poor thing was trying to protect herself. But from whom? And for what reason? Detectives had doubts about the woman's identity. Perhaps her fears were unfounded and she was being threatened. However, what could Holly be involved in? Detectives decided to delve into her line of work and discovered the following. Layla Love. The beauty parlor wasn't Holly's only source of income. No, she was not engaged in substance trafficking or smuggling. From the age of 18, the girl worked part-time as an escort. It was there that she earned a lot of money, as she served VIP clients, and personal business was used as a hobby, as well as a cover and concealment of income. In the intimate sphere, Holly was known as Layla Love and dealt only with wealthy men. Others couldn't afford her. Holly's duties included different services, escorting to events, massage, striptease, or passionate night. It must be said that she had quite a large client base. Her bright appearance attracted men, and they were ready to do anything for the time spent with her next to her. During this period, she earned a large sum and ensured a trouble-free life. At the same time, gained a lot of envious people, persecutors, and enemies. The fact is that the woman did not particularly hide her second profession. Of course, she did not shout about it at every turn, but her close friends, as well as Bill, knew about it. It turned out that at the beginning of the relationship, she honestly confessed everything to Lanway. Because of her large income, she did not want to stop working and considered it a mere formality. However, it wasn't. Her occupation could turn against her and attract dangerous clients. It was quite possible that the men who broke into her house were related to this. The CCTV images of the men were later released to the public, but due to the poor quality of the images, their release was not positive. First suspect. Clarification in the investigation came after the wanted subscriber was identified. He turned out to be a 30-year-old resident of North Carolina named Adam Cary. It turned out that the man is a former military man with special training, was convicted, currently working in a private security organization. In fact, he was a real mercenary and a killing machine. Remarkably, Adam's photo matched the man's face that Holly's camera captured. Detectives got into his background and found out that he's a pretty nasty character. He had previously served a 4-month sentence for impersonating a police officer. During the search in his apartment were found weapons, silencers, and telescopic sights, components of explosives, flashbang grenades. Curiously, he got off with a laughable sentence for possession of such a large amount of dangerous weapons, which means he had strong support and protection. It took investigators a lot of work to figure out the connection between Holly, her ex-boyfriend, and the mercenary. Since Adam was proficient in all kinds of weapons and fighting techniques, his job was to carry out serious assignments and guard dignitaries. After he came to the attention of the police, it was decided to bring the man in for questioning. For a long time, they could not get anything substantial out of him. Eventually, he was detained and given time to think about the situation. In the meantime, the investigators turned their attention to another figure who had surfaced as a result of examining the victim's contacts. There was someone else of interest among them. Lovers. Holly's hot fan turned out to be Eric Charles Mond, owner of Mond Toyota car dealership out of Austin, Texas. All in all, quite a famous person. For everyone around him, Mr. Mond was a model family man and father. In fact, he had weaknesses peculiar to many men, extramarital affairs on the side. The businessman often came to Nashville to visit his son, studying at a local college. At the same time, he was satisfying his secret desires. One day he met Holly, who impressed him with her appearance. They began to see each other periodically. On February 3, 2020, Eric, using an alias, contacted Holly by email. He said that he would soon be in town and hoped to meet him. A few days later, he again reminded me of himself. The next letter said, "Good morning, beautiful. I'm looking forward to today. I'm in Nashville. I'll meet you at the bar like last time. Text me when you get there." Apparently, the date went as arranged. However, on March 1st, he received several threatening messages. The unknown person blackmailed him that if he did not receive $25,000 for his silence, he would tell his wife about the secret connection, ruin his reputation and family. Naturally, this state of affairs did not suit the man, except he didn't realize who was really behind the correspondence. A private security agency. It is known that after that, Eric Charles Mond turned to his 47-year-old acquaintance, whose name was Gilad Peled. Gilad was consulting for a dealership to solve the parking lot homelessness problem and had a private security agency where, by a strange coincidence, the arrested Adam Cary worked. All that is known about the owner of the firm is that he organized his business after returning to Texas from Israel, where he had been living for some time. However, his company was not going through the best of times. The reason for this was the fact that the citizens of Texas have the ability to defend themselves independently and carry weapons. Despite this, there were still orders, but the security services were not very popular. Therefore, when Gilead was approached by Eric, the owner of the company was happy to get such a well-known and profitable client. A few weeks later, just after the murder of Holly and Bill, Eric left a positive comment on the site where private security companies are registered. At first glance, his comment contained nothing unusual. Eric praised the work done by Gilad's staff and was pleased with the result. There seemed to be a real breakthrough in the investigation. There was a connection between the murdered men, the suspect, and the wealthy businessman. The only thing left to do was to get Adam to talk and unravel this tangle of secrets. Mercenaries. The detectives warned Adam Cary that keeping quiet was useless. It would only get worse. Slowly, he began to talk and explained that Eric Mond had been outed to his boss. Eric complained of harassment and extortion, suspected his mistress, and asked him to look into it. For these purposes, Gilad Peled turned to Adam and his 46-year-old partner, Brian Brockway from Austin. The latter also happened to be an ex-military infantryman capable of performing combat missions. Initially, they were required to find out the sender of the messages and intimidate him. Adam reported everything to Gilad, as evidenced by the discovered progress report, which resembled mostly military reports. The surveillance revealed that the man who had threatened the customer was Bill Lanway. Holly had no idea what was going on behind her back. After the breakup, the former boyfriend was very angry and decided to set her up, and at the same time to get rich. He found out about the relationship between Holly and Eric Mond and started texting him under an assumed name. When the truth came out, the monitors reported everything to the management. However, their mission was soon adjusted. Among the instructions was to silence unwanted witnesses to the affair by any means necessary. Eric Mond was terrified because after it became clear that the extortionist is Bill Lanway, Bill again claimed to be the one. On March 11th, Eric's house received a phone call. If his wife picked up the phone, his secret would be revealed, and the most famous family in Austin would be ruined. Gilad proposed to the customer of his services to deal with the stalker and at the same time to deal with the girl according to the laws of Hollywood action movies. He agreed and offered $750,000 for the job. Holly and Bill's days were numbered. Order. On March 12th, 2020, Holly and her ex-boyfriend were seen leaving the house together. The couple then proceeded to the parking lot and got into a car. Apparently, they decided to drive somewhere for a while, as they did not bring any belongings with them. Since the young people were being followed, they were quickly intercepted by an armed Adam and Brian. Bill and Holly were kidnapped. Their vehicle was then moved to a construction site on Old Hickory Boulevard. They were shot at the site, after which they left their bodies in the car and dumped down an embankment. In the hours that followed, the mercenaries worked to remove evidence and connections to the crime. They also recovered the car they had rented for the monstrous mission. After the deed was done, the trio dispersed in different directions. The order was fulfilled, however. The mercenaries left a legacy. Eric Mond had set himself up and clearly rushed to a positive review. Arrests. After Adam Cary, Brian Broquet, and Gilad Peled were arrested, the detectives went on the sly. They wanted to catch the customer red-handed, so they asked one of them to contact him and make up a story. Gilad called Eric and said that one of his partners learned about what had happened and demanded to enter the share. The head of the security agency offered to get rid of him, the same way he had done with Holly and Bill. Despite the fact that Eric Mond was very angry, he agreed to commit another massacre. He didn't care how many people died. The main thing for him was to keep the secret and feel safe. On December 10th, 2021, the famous businessman was detained. All four were charged with contract murder. Of all the accused, only Eric repented of what he had done. The rest of the mercenaries did not express the slightest regret. Before Gilad and Brian were arrested, they had been bugged. The men joked that the couple killed got off easy. During the interrogations, the customer tried to turn the tables on the perpetrators. Allegedly, they misunderstood the task, and he only wanted to get the extortionist out and scare. However, when the detectives presented evidence of his involvement in the crime, he confessed to everything and confirmed the criminal conspiracy. Justice. In November 2023, court hearings began and lasted 2 weeks. It was established that the black plot took place in early March 2020. Transactions between the defendants proved the withdrawals and transfers of money. On March 5th, Eric paid Gilad $15,000 as an advance payment. The manager of the security company was responsible for each employee's bank account. On March 9th, Holly and Bill were placed under surveillance. 3 days later, Mond wired another $150,000. This became a kind of signal to start the operation. After the order was completed, the participants in the crime received the balance. Cumulatively, in March 2023, $750,000 came from the famous car dealer. It took the jury 7 hours to reach a verdict. On November 17, Brian and Adam were found guilty of contract murder resulting in death as well as conspiracy to commit kidnapping and kidnapping resulting in death. Held was also found guilty of the charges. Prior to trial, he entered into a plea agreement against his co-defendants. On November 30th of the same year, justice also caught up with Eric Mond. He was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire, but not guilty of kidnapping resulting in death. All the defendants were sentenced to life in prison without parole. It is known that the businessman's defense team was going to appeal the remaining charge of the trial for which the conviction was handed down. After the hearing, the prosecutor's office said it was satisfied with the punishment the court had chosen. The detective who led the investigation said there was finally relief that the perpetrators had been caught, were able to stand trial and be fairly punished. However, that won't fill the void left for the victims' families. Their families did not deserve this tragedy, and Holly and Bill did not deserve to be killed, he said. Afterward. Unfortunately, this crime is proof of how unpredictable and tragic life can be. In fact, Holly was an innocent victim in the schemes of her ex-boyfriend and a conspiracy of dangerous people. Forbidden passion is punishable, and dirty money has a retroactive effect. As for Bill, despite his misdemeanor, he also did not deserve the punishment he received. Curiously, with his actions he framed not only his ex-girlfriend, but also himself. Who organized a bloodbath in a quiet town? Almost any crime in a small, quiet town where everyone knows each other becomes a high-profile event that will be discussed for a long time. But if it is a brutal crime against an entire family, which has never happened before in these parts, then such stories very quickly grow all sorts of rumors, speculation, fictional gruesome details, and eventually turn into a real urban legend. In the fall of 2010, the small Australian town of Kapunda, with a population of only 3,000 people, located on the Light River, near the Barossa Valley in South Australia, was shaken by the horrific news of the massacre of an entire family. Local law enforcers had never encountered anything like this before, and therefore found themselves in a state of confusion. Rumors immediately spread around the city. Everyone retold the story in their own way, so that the police even had to partially classify the case so as not to leak information and not to sow more panic. The dead family was well known and respected in the city. They had no enemies and ill-wishers, as it seemed to everyone at that time, and there was no motive for the crime at first glance either. What happened looked like a senseless bloodbath, and detectives even suggested that it was the work of some madman or maniac. It is noteworthy that the real culprit was not even initially included in the number of suspects, and probably would have been able to get away with it if he had not accidentally given himself away. The story of the Rowe family. The head of the family, Andrew Rowe, was a native of England, where he was born in 1965. At the age of 3, he and his parents emigrated to Australia, where they decided to stay forever. The family settled in the suburbs of Adelaide, where the boy went to school. He from an early age was sociable, had a great sense of humor, and had a lot of friends, and also loved fishing with his father. After graduating from high school while studying in the capital of South Australia, Adelaide, a young man met the same cheerful girl named Rose, who was only a year younger than him. Between students quickly began a romantic relationship, and in 1985, they married, playing a modest wedding, which was attended only by their closest people. In 1987, the couple had their first child together, a boy, whom the happy young parents named Christopher, and in 1994 their daughter Chantel was born. The family settled in a quiet and cozy town, Kapunda, where they opened their own small business, founding a company that provided professional carpet cleaning services. Their business quickly took off, and the business brought in a good income, allowing the Rowe to do nothing to deny themselves. The children attended one of the local schools, where they studied well, and in high school began to work part-time, striving for self-sufficiency and financial independence. The eldest son was interested in music and practiced guitar, while the youngest daughter painted well, attended a dance studio, and played on the school basketball team. Chantel was described as a very kind, sympathetic girl, always ready to come to the aid of those who were in trouble. She dreamed of getting a law degree and becoming a lawyer, and her brother decided to connect his fate with programming and computer technologies. The children were very close to their parents, and in general their family was friendly, strong, and happy. In the summer of 2010, 23-year-old Christopher moved out of his parents' home and began living with his girlfriend in the same city, just a few blocks away from his family. And in late September of the same year, Chantel got a part-time job at a roadside cafe as a waitress. It was inconvenient for her to get to the workplace, so her father or brother drove her there. Since the girl was already 16 years old, she dreamed of passing her driver's license as soon as possible to drive a car, but these dreams, alas, were not destined to come true. On November 4th, 2010, Christopher, together with his girlfriend, went on vacation to Brisbane, and soon after returning, young people planned to play a wedding. But on the 8th, after the young man was unable to reach any of his family members, he became very concerned. Chris called his father's office, and after learning that he did not go to work for an unknown reason and did not answer the phone, he realized that something bad had happened. So he called his friend and asked him to go to their house to see if everything was okay. A brutal massacre of a family. On November 8th, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a patrol car pulled up to the Rowe family home. It is worth noting that at the time, the small-town police station had only 2 people working, and when they realized that they were dealing with a brutal triple crime, they immediately requested help from the administrative center. The picture of the crime was so shocking that even the experienced detectives who came from Adelaide said they had never encountered anything like it. The house inside looked like the set of a horror movie. There was blood everywhere, on the floor, walls, furniture, curtains, and even the ceiling. The breathless and badly disfigured bodies of 45-year-old Andrew and 44-year-old Rose lay in the kitchen, while Chantel's torn body lay on the bed in her room. All members of the family had suffered dozens of penetrating stab wounds and had died long before police and paramedics arrived. Almost immediately, suspicions arose that the crime was of a personal nature because nothing was missing from the house, nothing was searched, and valuable things, phones, laptop, expensive camera, and even money were lying in prominent places. It was also suggested that the killer was not alone, because it is not easy to cope with 3 adults. Either it was a tall, sturdy, and physically strong man. The detectives noticed that in some places the footprints had been ineptly washed and wiped, which led them to conclude that the perpetrator had attempted to hide the evidence, but soon gave up and abandoned the idea. There were also clear, bloody shoe prints on the floor, heading towards the door, but suddenly breaking off, which could indicate that the perpetrator had taken off his shoes and left in socks. Another curious point is that there were no signs of forced entry. This could indicate that the victims either knew their perpetrator and let him into the house themselves, or he got in by some other means. The family, by all accounts, had no enemies or ill-wishers, and no one could even guess who and why the parents and daughter had been so brutally murdered. Several clear fingerprints were found on the door in the room of the murdered girl, but checking them against the police database yielded nothing. The person who left them had never previously come to the attention of law enforcers. He either did not commit offenses or went unpunished. The house was cordoned off as a crime scene, and the area was fenced off from prying eyes, as well as from the press representatives who arrived here. Almost immediately, it was decided not to disclose details and not to spread the word about the investigation, so as not to scare the criminal and not let him lie low or escape. Nevertheless, rumors about the maniac quickly spread through the city. People became afraid to go out in the street at night and locked their houses with all the locks and bolts. First suspects. As wild as it may sound, the first suspect was the only surviving family member, Christopher. At the time of the tragedy, he was in Queensland, where he was vacationing with his fiancée in Moreton Bay on the Pacific coast. He was the first to sound the alarm when he discovered that his loved ones were out of contact, and took the first flight home when he learned the shocking news, but his alibi and fingerprints were checked first. However, he was immediately ruled out as a suspect, as he was indeed on the other side of the continent at the time of the crime. A curious fact was that the young girl, the perpetrator after the massacre, changed into clean clothes and laid on the bed. At the same time, there were bloody drag marks near the bed, which indicated that Chantel probably tried to hide from her executioner under the bed, but he pulled her out of there. In addition, forensic experts soon determined that she had been abused before her death. As noted earlier, it looked like the crime was very personal, and the perpetrator clearly had a grudge against the victims, hence such senseless cruelty. The head of the family received 36 stab wounds, and his wife was stabbed 50 times all over her body. And judging by the traces, she was attacked twice. But after the first attack, she managed to survive, and she even tried to call for help. On the body of the girl, forensic experts counted 33 stab wounds. In addition, she was abused. The police immediately began to find out whether the deceased was in a relationship, whether she was dating someone, and whether she had obsessive fans. It soon became known that the girl had been dating a guy named Dylan for about a year, with whom they went to the same school. The young man was also 16 years old, and the detectives doubted that such a brutal crime could have been committed by this young guy. Nevertheless, they needed to talk to him, check his alibi, and get his opinion as to who might have wanted to harm his girlfriend and her loved ones. Dylan willingly agreed to cooperate with the police and told them everything he knew. According to him, he and Chantel had a wonderful relationship. They loved each other and were going to get married as soon as they became adults. The death of his beloved girl was a huge shock for him, and he simply did not know how to live on. At the time of the massacre of the Rowe family, the guy was in a neighboring city on the anniversary of his grandfather, and his alibi could confirm dozens of people. The young man has also been ruled out as a suspect, searching for evidence and witnesses, so the police had fingerprints of the criminal, as well as his seminal fluid found on the body of the deceased Chantel, from which they managed to extract DNA, but it also did not appear in the police database. Notably, the family was massacred with carving knives that the perpetrator removed from a stand in their own kitchen. This could indicate that the crime was not planned in advance and could have been spontaneous. The murder weapons themselves could not be found at the scene, so the murderer took them with him when he left. Experts determined that the victims were killed between midnight and 2 a.m. One of Rowe's neighbors admitted that around 1 a.m. he heard Rose call for help twice, and then there was a thud, as if something heavy had fallen, and then everything went quiet. He thought it was strange, but he did not call the police, deciding that it was just a simple domestic quarrel between the couple, and he should not interfere in their family affairs. No strangers were seen near their house that evening. Police officers were carefully combing the area around the house looking for evidence or instruments of crime. It was also decided to reach out to the residents of the town through the media and encourage them to share any information that could help the investigation move forward in the case. But this approach rather made the detectives' job more difficult. Almost immediately, the police began to receive dozens of calls from concerned people who wanted to help, and all the information received had to be verified. Callers reported suspicious people, cars, tried to connect what happened with a gang of bikers, with drug dealers, and even reported suspicious posts on social networks found in the profiles of local residents. However, all the incoming information did not help law enforcement officers. 2 days before the tragedy, among the things in the house was found an expensive camera that belonged to the dead girl. As it turned out, Chantel was fond of photography, and detectives assumed that there may be pictures that would help the investigation. There were indeed many photos on the memory card, but the last ones interested the police most of all. It turned out that 2 days before the tragedy, on November 6th, in the house of Rowe was a friendly party, which was organized by Chantel. Her parents that day left with a sleepover to relatives, and she decided to take advantage of their absence. But it should be noted that it wasn't some kind of party with alcohol or something worse, but quite decent and quiet, sitting over watching movies and cooking dinner on the barbecue. Chantel had only invited her boyfriend and 3 of her best friends with their other halves, so there were only 8 people in the house. That evening, The hostess of the house took a lot of pictures that captured their good time. Some of the photos of the guests present that same evening published on their pages in social networks, noting friends there. All the friends stayed the night at the house Rowe and returned in the morning. Andrew and Rose even cooked breakfast for the guests, having a sit-down in the backyard. Detectives decided that it was necessary to interview all the people who were present at that party to find out whether the girl had enemies, envious, or stalkers, as well as to take everyone's fingerprints to compare with the samples found on the door of the room of the deceased. Chantel's friends still couldn't believe what had happened. They tried their best to help the investigation and showed up at the station to testify at the first call. The boys provided their fingerprints and DNA samples, but they did not match those found at the crime scene. They also allowed access to their social media pages and phones, and they also detailed all the events that took place at what turned out to be the last party. Dylan recalled that on Sunday, his girlfriend complained that she was not feeling well and probably had a cold. In the evening, she had developed a fever and realized that she couldn't go to work the next day, so she had called her boss and warned him about it. The next morning, around 5 o'clock, the guy texted her and asked how she was feeling. He saw the message light up as read, but Chantel never responded. The guy did not know that at that time his beloved and her parents were already dead, and the message was read by the criminal. Moreover, the police found out that the criminal even tried to write a reply text message, but since Chantel forgot to recharge her account, the message never went away. Nevertheless, the perpetrator tried to create the illusion that young Rowe was still alive. Unexpected suspect. Dylan and several close friends of the deceased helped police officers compile a list of all the people in Chantel's entourage with whom she had been in contact. Law enforcement began working their way down that list, talking to and checking out everyone listed there. After about a week, they reached a certain 18-year-old young man named Jason Downey. He had previously attended the same high school as the deceased and her boyfriend, but had graduated last year and was now working at a local auto repair shop. Initially, Jason didn't raise any suspicions at all. He was of average height, very thin, even skinny, and looked completely harmless. They planned to just interrogate him and let him go, but the young man began to behave strangely. Instead of answering the standard questions asked, he started complaining that Chantel didn't invite him to her party because everyone there was in pairs, and he didn't have a girlfriend. And afterward, he claimed that he had an alibi for the night of the crime, although no one had even asked him about it. The behavior of the guy seemed very suspicious to the law enforcers, and therefore it was decided to check him to the fullest extent, including fingerprinting and taking a DNA sample. Hearing about this, Downey did not show any excitement or concern and simply agreed to undergo all the necessary procedures. At this point, the police again doubted his guilt, but still decided to follow through with the test. When the expert took the guy's fingerprints, he noticed relatively fresh, deep cuts on his palms. Jason explained that he had hurt himself on the job at the machine shop, but all the cuts looked smooth, as if they had been made with a thin, sharp tool. The test results showed that it was Downey's prints that were found on the dead woman's bedroom door. For the full picture, all we had to do was wait for the DNA test results, which were due in 2 days. In the meantime, they decided to talk to the guy again and ask him how his fingerprints ended up in the house of the deceased if he had not been present at the party the night before. The suspect again looked perfectly calm and explained that he had visited Rowe's house with Dylan about a month and a half ago and had probably left fingerprints there. But this version did not correspond to reality because the prints were fresh and clear. They were not dusty. They were not smudged or rubbed, which would have happened to them over such a long period of time. And on November 16, 2010, the DNA results came back from the lab, dispelling any last doubts. It was Jason who had abused the girl that night and taken her life as well as that of her parents. But why would he do that to her? And where did this scrawny young man get his strength and rage? He was arrested the same day, and now the detectives had to find out what moved this man and what was the motive for such a brutal massacre of the family. Who is Jason Downey? Jason Downey was born in September 1992 in the Scottish town of Kilmarnock, where he spent his childhood and early adolescence. He was the youngest of 2 children in the family and was raised with his own older brother, Jamie. His parents divorced when the boy was only 8 months old, and from then on he was raised by his mother, Lorraine. His father soon remarried, and the brothers had a half-sister, Judy, with whom, however, they practically did not communicate. When Jason was 13 years old, they emigrated with his mother and brother to Australia and settled in the town of Kapunda. In the new place, the woman married for the second time to a local resident, whom she had previously met through the internet. The boy, who grew up in a big city, did not like it here at all. He literally hated provincial life and dreamed of getting out of here. Jason had almost no friends at school. He was considered strange, and they talked to him more out of pity. He was overly talkative, self-assured, and constantly lied, telling everyone what a talented athlete he was, how popular he was, and how many admirers he had. In reality, girls ignored him. No one wanted to get involved with this odd and ugly young man. Dylan and Jason played on the same basketball team, and Dylan felt sorry for Jason because almost no one wanted to be friends with him. He started inviting him to various friendly gatherings and even introduced him to his girlfriend Chantel, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. Chantel also communicated with Downey out of politeness and pity because he was a friend of her boyfriend, and she also a couple of times stood up for him in front of other teenagers who tried to insult him. However, her desire to help a hurt and hounded boy led Jason to fall madly in love with her. Moreover, he began to think that she has the same feelings for him, but because of Dylan cannot say it openly. Over time, teenage crush transformed into a real obsession, but others did not notice it, as Downey became more and more immersed in his fantasies, in which he was happy with Chantel. The girl never gave him hope or made any ambiguous hints, but only tried to be polite and friendly. She just happened to be the only one who was kind to him, and he mistook it for love. The arrest and the first interrogation. When the last doubts that Jason had committed the triple crime were dispelled, the law enforcers realized that the arrest could not be delayed, but they did not know how best to do it because they were afraid that the guy might not have done something. Everyone knew exactly what he was capable of, so they decided to lure him to the station under a harmless pretext. As soon as the suspect arrived, handcuffs were snapped on his wrists. Surprisingly, the guy showed no emotion at all. He wasn't surprised, scared, or angry. He was completely calm. Downey denied all the accusations and tried his best to get out of it. He insisted that he left his fingerprints when he visited the house a month and a half ago. And when the guy was asked how his DNA ended up on the body and inside the deceased, he said that at the same time during his visit, they had consensual intimacy. Of course, this could not be true, because seminal fluid could not have remained on the body for so long, neither inside nor outside. As for the suspect's alibi, he stated that he had an argument with his mother and stepfather in the evening, after which he went to sleep in the car. The parents confirmed the fact of the quarrel, but no one knew where Jason went afterward. The police also managed to find out that in the evening, November 7th, he called Dylan, from whom he learned that Chantel was sick and would stay home on Monday. Apparently, it was after this conversation that he decided to go to Rowe's house. Around the same time, police were able to locate a pair of shoes discarded in a deserted area with traces of blood on them. The sole prints matched the marks at the crime scene. The shoes showed traces of blood from all 3 victims, and inside were Downey's own sweat, reconstructing the timeline of events. When Jason realized that the evidence against him is too much and it is useless to defend himself, he decided to confess to the murder and agreed to cooperate with the investigation in order to avoid the most severe punishment. However, he tried to minimize his guilt in every possible way. He even promised to show the place where he threw the crime tools, but there were no knives there. Most likely the guy was just lying. That evening he really quarreled with his mother and stepfather, after which he left home, intending to spend the night in the car. However, after a phone conversation with Dylan, Jason became obsessed with seeing Chantel. Initially, he planned to just drive up to her house and stare blankly through the windows, as he had done so many times before, but it was dark indoors. Then the guy drove the car to the end of the street, returned back on foot, and sneaked into the house through a small window in the bathroom, which the owners left open. As he was very thin, he succeeded without difficulty. He sat in the bathroom for about half an hour, listening to the sounds to make sure everyone had gone to bed. The suspect then headed to Chantel's bedroom to, he said, confess his feelings to her. But why he took the knife from the kitchen with him if he was going to confess his love, the guy could not explain. According to the police, Jason initially planned to abuse the object of his lust by threatening her with a knife, but she naturally resisted. During the attack, he wounded her several times, and the victim tried to hide from her tormentor under the bed. Her parents woke up from the noise, but they did not have time to get to their daughter's room as the perpetrator jumped out in front of them. The guy was literally mad at the sight of blood. He attacked Andrew, quickly stabbing him in the neck and chest area. Then he knocked Rose to the ground and stabbed her a dozen times until the woman lost consciousness. Downey then returned to Chantel's room, pulled her out from under the bed, took advantage of her, and then finished her off with the knife in cold blood. Why he changed his victim into clean clothes, he was never able to explain. In the meantime, the miraculously surviving woman managed to get to the back door and even managed to call for help twice before the perpetrator caught up with her and finished her off with a second knife, which he snatched from the same stand. After massacring the family, the guy made an attempt to clean up the house, but quickly abandoned the idea because there was too much blood. He realized that he had made a mess, so he took off his bloody shoes and left the scene in just his socks. He took the knives with him and disposed of them in such a way that they were never found. Trial and sentencing. Jason's trial began only in the fall of 2011, almost a year after his crime. At the trial, the guy behaved absolutely calmly, did not express any emotions, but constantly changed his testimony. He claimed that he was in shock, that he did not remember killing the Rowe family, and kept repeating that he loved Chantel and did not want to hurt her. It is noteworthy that after the massacre, he took with him the victim's pendant, which was later found in his room during a search, and the chain from the pendant was in the glove compartment of his car. At trial, he recounted again that Chantel had not invited him to a party she had thrown at her house the night before because he did not have a date. Allegedly, he was very upset that he had been ignored and noted that the tragedy might not have happened if Chantel had called him then. The defendant testified with a completely impartial face, and in a phone conversation he told his brother that he pleaded guilty to avoid a life sentence. That is, Jason was not remorseful at all, but only wanted to receive a lighter sentence. However, he managed to get his way. On April 19, 2012, Downey was found guilty of a triple crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of qualifying for parole after 35 years. During the announcement of the sentence, not a single muscle on his face did not tremble. He remained as calm and impartial as if it was not about him, but about someone else. If he had not pleaded guilty, he would have been eligible for release after 45 years. Christopher Rowe considered the punishment just, although he noted that no court could take away his pain and bring his family back to life. In memory of his parents and sister, he made tattoos with their names. Finally, I would like to add that Christopher is currently married, and together with his wife, they are raising their son, Kobe. The reverse side of goodness sometimes has irreparable consequences, but people still continue to do good deeds and do not wait for reciprocal gratitude. In our story, a sincere act done years earlier not only completely changed the lives of all the heroes, but also resulted in death. At 4:45 a.m. on March 2, 2018, Travis County, Texas police officers received a call from a woman seeking help. She reported that she was hiding in a closet when she heard several gunshots in the house, and the likely gunman was still inside. During the phone call, the dispatcher asked the woman not to come out of hiding and to wait for police officers who were on their way to the house. Minutes later, the house was already cordoned off by police, and the woman in the closet turned out to be local resident Corey Shaunessy. The woman's condition was very discouraging. Corey did not understand what had happened and was very frightened. In the kitchen, her husband Theodore Shaunessy was lying in a pool of his own blood near the table. Sit back, because today we are investigating another tragic case together. Theodore Shaunessy was born February 7, 1963, and was the youngest child in a large family Shaunessy who lived in Arizona near Phoenix. Ted, from an early age, loved fast cars and everything associated with them. As a teenager, he literally dreamed of sports cars. Theodore grew up absolutely fearless man, for whom adrenaline was the best way to cheer up and feel the taste for life. Nevertheless, he was a kind and cheerful guy, a good friend, and a good son. At the age of 20, Ted met Corey Garman at a local arcade. The young men immediately liked each other, as they had a lot in common, including a love of jewelry and books. Sympathy quickly turned into true love, and in 1989, they were married. After their marriage, the Shaunessy couple moved to Austin, Texas, where they quickly settled in and launched the family business opening Gallery Jewelers. It was a high-level operation that the Shaunessy family built together. Corey had a passion for gemstones, fine art, and worked as an appraiser for the entire family company. Ted, on the other hand, was the face of the store, as he had a talent for connecting with people, and they were not just drawn to him, but were infused with his energy. He was very friendly and active, because wherever he went, he became the soul of the company. This quality perfectly helped in business, as he could find a common language with clients and partners and achieve the best conditions for all parties. The business became quite successful, and after a while, the family fortune was estimated at $8 million. But despite the wealth, Theodore always remained generous and attentive to others. He often bought food for the needy and regularly made donations to charitable foundations. The family business continued to grow, and the couple purchased a beautiful new home near their store. The couple complemented each other and seemed like the perfect tandem. Indeed, everything seemed almost perfect, if only for one thing. The couple had no children. As the jewelry business grew, Ted and Corey decided to expand their family as well. In 2000, they made a life-changing decision and adopted a 16-month-old boy, taking him from an orphanage in Ukraine. It was just instant and unconditional love. The little gray-eyed boy was named Nicholas. Such a long-awaited event completed the family life of Shaunessy, because now they had everything for absolute happiness. Nicholas grew up an active and obedient child. He loved animals and cars, just like his dad Ted, because he often took the boy with him to the track. Father and son went karting together, rode sports cars, and regularly spent time together just walking in the park. In high school, Nicholas became interested in car dismantling and even launched his own small business, in which his parents helped him with finances. The young man bought the necessary equipment and enlisted the help of friends. In the same period of time, Nicholas met Jackie Edison. Immediately after meeting, the young people felt a mutual attraction, but after meeting Nicholas's parents, they did not like the young lady. Corey felt that she was not suitable for him, but despite this, no one prevented the relationship of teenagers in order not to lose touch with Nicholas. After a while, Jackie was able to win their favor and started spending so much time at the Shaunessy house that they let her move in. In August 2017, Nick and Jackie moved away from his parents to start a new life in College Station. She at school and he as a day trader, with financial support from his parents. The young man was very attached to his parents and tried not to cut ties with his family and made the 2-hour trip to Austin every weekend to visit them. Everything seemed to be going well in his life, and nothing seemed to portend trouble. On March 2, 2018, at 4:30 a.m., Ted and Corey awoke to the insistent barking of their dogs. This was generally a common occurrence, as the animals often reacted violently to small animals that might accidentally wander onto the family home's property. Corey thought there was nothing to worry about, and the dogs would quiet down in a few minutes, but Ted decided to check it out. He armed himself with his .40 caliber pistol and went to check the house. Corey laid her head on the pillow and almost immediately fell back asleep. It was only a few seconds later, however, that she heard a gunshot in the kitchen, followed by a series of more shots. Frightened, Corey grabbed her revolver, which was always next to the bed, and went to help her husband. But on her way out of the bedroom, she saw her favorite dog. A dog named Bart had been shot in the doorway. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared in it and looked menacing. Corey was frightened and fired indiscriminately, firing all 6 bullets toward the door. Unloading the revolver, she hid in a closet expecting to be found and killed. Luckily, Corey was able to grab her cell phone and called emergency services to report that a criminal had broken into the house. She said she shot one of the attackers and heard moans coming from the room. While speaking with the dispatcher, the frightened woman repeated that someone was moaning, but she didn't know who was making the sounds and wanted to check. However, the dispatcher calmed her down and told her not to leave the shelter and to wait for the police. 15 minutes later, she was informed that the police had arrived at the house. By this point, the moans had died down and there was a sepulchral silence in the house. Corey stepped out of the closet and headed for the front door. As she passed the kitchen, she saw her husband in a pool of blood. He showed no signs of life, and shell casings were scattered around him. Overcome with terror, she reached the door and opened it, but there was no one on the doorstep. Coincidentally, the officers had the wrong house, as this street had an unusual precinct layout. The officers were on her neighbor's doorstep, trying to figure out which side of the street the shots were coming from. Eventually, they sorted themselves out and ran to the Shaunessy family home. Waiting for them on the doorstep was a shaking Corey. Her life was completely ruined. She didn't understand what had happened. The police officers went inside and tried to calm the woman down. Corey called her son and reported the attack. She and Jackie immediately left for Austin and arrived at her parents' home around 8 a.m. Theodore Shaunessy, 55, was dead after being shot multiple times in the head, back, and thigh. Family acquaintances and friends were horrified by what had happened. No one suspected that they could have deadly enemies capable of being shot at point-blank range in such cold blood in the middle of the night in their own home. After the tragedy, Nick and Jackie stayed in the house with Corey to give her the support she needed and to participate in the investigation. Law enforcement officers examined the crime scene. 2 different types of .40 and .38 caliber shell casings were found, which means the shooting was from 2 different guns. No signs of forced entry were found, but in the far bedroom, an open window with the safety netting removed drew attention. The perpetrators must have entered through it. Here, the forensic team also managed to find the first fingerprint, which was immediately sent to the laboratory for examination. Police spoke to several neighbors about the Shaunessy family and if they saw anything suspicious. One neighbor told police that this was not the first time Shaunnessy's home had been targeted, as they own a chain of jewelry stores. The police took Corey's pajamas, which she was wearing for examination, and also swabbed her hands for gunshot residue. Corey was honest from the beginning about the fact that she had fired her gun. The police began their investigation and quickly ruled out burglary, noting no forced entry and no stolen valuables. Shifting their attention to the murder investigation, they found that all the doors in the house were intact except for the entrance to Nicholas Shaunessy's room. The door had been opened. An examination of the room revealed that a firearm was missing from a dresser with a .40 caliber pistol drawer. It turned out to be the only item missing from the house. Given that the caliber matched one of the guns used in the massacre, detectives assumed it was the one used to kill Ted. Nick, Jackie, and Corey agreed to help the investigation in any way they could. Corey allowed the police to search her cell phone, and although Nick said he hadn't been in Austin in about a month, he and Jackie did the same. All 3 also agreed to answer questions at the station. The goal of the police was simply to try to get as much information as possible about the family and the events of that day to get on the trail of the perpetrators. Investigators were still unsure if the murder was part of a random attack, a botched robbery, or if it was a targeted crime. They found no unidentified prints at the scene, so they had to wonder if the sole surviving victim, Corey Shaunessy, could actually have been a suspect. After all, she was the only person in the house. The police couldn't get past the fact that the shooters left Corey alive. They also found it odd that the shooters were in the house for 17 minutes before the shooting occurred, and nothing was stolen from the house. Assistant Prosecutor Amy Meredith, who examined the scene of the tragedy, was certain that Ted Shaunessy knew the attacker. She was also certain that the house was too big and too dark for a couple of random burglars or jewelry thieves to navigate it so quickly. Corey Shaunessy was increasingly under suspicion because investigators believed she had a motive. Police learned that Corey was the beneficiary of Ted's $1 million policy. Their home and business were also worth a lot of money, but there was no evidence against Corey. But Corey wasn't the only family member who aroused suspicion. Shaugnessy's son, Nicholas, who was more than 100 miles away from the scene of the tragedy at the time of the crime, also came under suspicion. On the morning of the tragedy, he was agitated, and one important moment caught the attention of investigators. After questioning him, he walked directly to a wide-open side window on the first floor. It was the window to his room. He went to that particular side of the house to look specifically at that window, which was not visible just from the front of the house. It was the exact window that the criminals entered through, but at that point, Nick had no information from the investigators about the criminals entering through that window. After all, how would he know the point of entry if he had no part in creating it? Police dug deeper into Nicholas's financial history and discovered that he had been struggling financially for a long period of time leading up to the crime. An important revelation was that Nicholas had borrowed $30,000 from his mother for the business, and she had recently written him a message reminding him to repay the loan. In addition, he owed a neighbor $20,600. These financial stressors represented a potential motive to commit the crime. However, the investigation took a more important turn when it was discovered that Nicholas was the sole beneficiary of a $2 million insurance payout in the event that his parents did not pass away. This detail intensified the intense scrutiny on Nick, making him a prime suspect in the eyes of the police. Nicholas's phone also caught the investigators' attention, specifically an app that gave him access to the alarm system at his parents' home. Corey told them that the family often chose not to arm the system and that it was disabled that night. But detectives noticed something in the account's history. Corey said they only used the alarm system when they weren't home. However, the system detected that there was an activation to open a window at 4:27 a.m. The system detected that there was an activation to open a window. About 17 minutes later, the system detected broken glass. Another surprise in the search of the home was Nicholas and Jackie's marriage certificate. It turned out that they were secretly married back in August 2017 and didn't disclose their secret marriage until after the murder happened. But the closer police looked, the more compromising evidence they found that Nick and Jackie were indeed planning to kill Shaunessy's parents. We remember that Nick was more than 100 miles away from Austin at the time of the crime, but phone records showed that he was lying when he said he hadn't been in Austin for a month. On February 28, just 2 days before Ted was killed, his cell phone use was recorded in Austin. Investigators wondered if he had been in town making final preparations. Nicholas and Jackie's phones were examined. They deleted several text messages that had been synchronized with Nicholas's computer. On February 24th, Nick sent Jackie a text message saying he was working on it. And Jackie's response to the text message was, "Do they want $50K or not? We can't afford to pay half that early." The police searched Nicholas and Jackie's apartment. Everyone was shocked at how many cameras were installed in the apartment. The cameras proved that they were at home on the morning of the day of the crime. They found jewelry, ammunition, and guns in the safe. One of the boxes of ammunition was the same make and caliber as one of the murder weapons. It was a .38 caliber pistol and was missing 6 bullets. In other correspondence, Nick asked Jackie to withdraw money from the account. So, if this happens, cash in hand. Jackie had withdrawn $1,000 from the bank just days before the crime. Authorities suspected it was no coincidence. During the investigation, investigators contacted the man who officiated Nick and Jackie's wedding, Nick's high school friend, Spencer Patterson. Although the attempt to contact him was quite difficult, the information obtained was another important piece of evidence to prove Nicholas's guilt. The fingerprint from the window in Nicholas's bedroom proved to be a dead end. It belonged to the man who installed the window. But police learned that Nicholas had used that window to sneak in and out of the house when he lived there. His best friend Spencer also knew about it. Spencer was interviewed by police. He also knew about where Ted and Corey kept the safe in their home. Police searched Spencer's home, car, and cell phone. In the car, police found a .38 caliber handgun. It was sent for forensics, but it was not one of the murder weapons. Spencer's cell phone also showed that he was at home the morning of the crime. Spencer was ruled out as a suspect, but he added to the piggy bank of suspicion against Nicholas. Spencer revealed that shortly before the crime, Nick talked about getting $8 million when Ted and Corey left. In correspondence between Spencer and Nicholas, Shaunessy tried to hire him to kill the family. Steal all their stuff, no need for the mask because they will all die. Nick wrote. On May 29, 2018, police arrested Nicholas Shaunessy and Jackie Edison for criminal solicitation. Corey couldn't believe it. The woman believed the authorities were trying to frame her son, who by then was working in his father's place at the jewelry store. Corey still believed it was a mistake. She said she needed absolute proof of their involvement. 2 weeks after the arrest, Jackie was released on bail. Corey hired the best lawyer she could find for her son. After the tragedy, in an interview, Corey Shaunessy said, "You could have told me that aliens landed in the front yard, and I would have believed that rather than I would have believed that Nicholas and Jackie were planning to kill us." For months, Corey had been by Nick's side. She truly believed that maybe the kids were involved in something in College Station, where Nicholas owed someone money, or maybe there was something strange with illegal substances, or maybe he told the wrong person that his parents were jewelers. The woman was ready to believe anything but that her son was planning to kill them. But the police were certain that Nick and Jackie were behind the attack. It remained to find out who had shot Ted Shaunessy, and that was no easy task. After all, the traces and evidence have exhausted themselves, and the investigation has reached a dead end. Time passed, and 4 months after the crime, Detective James Moore decided to review the surveillance video from Nick and Jackie's porch, recorded just 2 days before the attack. For a mother who had struggled for months to keep faith in her son, this was the final straw. Too much had happened to really point to Nicholas and Jackie's involvement, and Corey realized with horror that she had spent months harboring the very people who had planned to kill Ted and her that night. Surveillance footage from the front porch of the house proved to be a major twist in the case. The footage, recorded just 2 days before the attack, shows Nick Shaunessy greeting 2 men at the front door. One of them is wearing a green t-shirt with Anderson written on it. Detectives rushed to the Anderson Window Company in search of the man from the recording. His name was Cameron Vosmek, and he wasn't home that day. But his wife answered the door, and quickly got their attention. She said that a few months earlier, a man named Johnny Leon had asked her husband to commit murder for money. But Cameron turned him down. Police ruled Vosmek out as a suspect. Johnny Leon was later called in for questioning, where he admitted that Nick had tried to hire him for $100,000, but he refused. He was arrested and revealed that he had traveled to Austin with Nicholas a few days before the crime. According to him, they parked in front of Shaunnessy's house. Nicholas walked to the house, came back, and said he couldn't get in. Johnny claimed that he was not involved in the crime after that night. However, his cell phone showed that he was in Austin on the morning of the crime. Johnny did not give the name of the second shooter, but did give his cell phone number. He had been in contact with a man named Arian Smith. Smith claimed he was with his girlfriend and that she could provide him with an alibi. His girlfriend said that on the morning of the day of the crime, Arian left her in a motel room. He left in her car, and she tried to call him several times, but the boyfriend did not answer. Arian's girlfriend told police that he had been carrying a .40 caliber handgun for several days after the crime. The gun was recovered from a member of Smith's family. Arian Smith was arrested. Police also discovered that both men had arrest records. In fact, they had been arrested together for dealing in illegal substances earlier. Nick Shaunessy and the 2 alleged killers were charged with capital murder. But by the spring of 2021, Amy Meredith left her job as an assistant district attorney. And there was a new district attorney, Jose Garza, whose office made the criminals an offer: avoid a possible death sentence by pleading guilty to a lesser charge of murder and serve 35 years with the possibility of parole. Leon and Smith agreed. Cary wrote Nicholas a letter and offered to accept the plea bargain. The sentence would be 35 years with the possibility of parole. In April 2021, Nicholas accepted the deal. He could be released when he turned 36 years old. At a hearing in April 2021, Nicholas Shaunessy pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 20 years of his sentence. Ariane Smith and Johnny Leon were sentenced to 35 years with the possibility of parole. Ariane Smith told police that after they shot Ted, he heard gunshots coming from the bedroom and a woman crying. Smith said he begged Leon not to kill Cary and to leave the house. They left because they didn't want to be shot. From prison, Nicholas sent letters to his mom. Cary was finally able to see her son after he had been in prison for 2 years. Cary knew a lot of information about Nicholas and Jackie's case, but she still didn't know who had used the .40 caliber gun because the gun belonged to Ted. In a private conversation, Nicholas revealed that he had given his father's gun to Ariane Smith. When this came to light, Cary was able to finally believe that Nicholas was indeed involved in the case. Neither I, my husband, no one in our family, nor any of our friends could ever imagine that Nicholas and Jackie would want us killed. Jackie tried to downplay her involvement in planning the crime. She claimed she knew nothing about it. The police knew she was lying because, based on the deleted text messages, she knew. She admitted that she had traveled with Nicholas to Austin several times, but said she had never taken Nicholas' words about massacring her parents seriously. Jackie divorced Nicholas while he was in prison. In March 2022, Jackie's charge was changed to conspiracy to commit a felony. In June 2023, Jackie pleaded guilty to attempted conspiracy to commit a felony. She was granted a suspended sentence, meaning she could plead guilty and receive probation. She spent 120 days in jail. She will be on probation for 10 years. Every year for 10 years on the anniversary of Ted Shaunnessy's murder, she will have to spend 2 days in jail. Nicholas was interviewed from prison. He said he wanted to impress Jackie and become rich. Ted Shaunessy, a registered jeweler, and his wife Cary Shaunessy, a certified gemologist appraiser, could have shared a prosperous life with their adopted son, Nicholas. Ted, who founded Gallery Jewelers in Austin in 1995, achieved success, earning the family a respected name in their community, was murdered by son Nick, who put a dollar sign on his parents' lives and decided to take away their happy life. Currently, the victim's son remains incarcerated at the Clemens Unit in Brazoria, Texas. Ariane Smith is serving his sentence at the LeBlanc Unit in Beaumont of the aforementioned state. Johnny Leon remains incarcerated at the Barry B. Telford Unit in New Boston, Texas. This is a story of exemplary transformation that society opened its eyes to too late. Sometimes kindness comes at too high a cost, and the person who seemed close becomes an executioner. Ironically, the enthusiastic Shaunessys traveled to the ends of the earth to bring home a criminal. It is a pity that they, enamored with love for the child, could not convey to their son the simple truth of life that money is the most easily replenishable resource, but time, unfortunately, is not. In an interview Nicholas gave from prison, he sincerely apologizes to his mother. But is it possible to accept an apology that shouldn't be there in the first place? Throughout the years of investigation, Cary Shaunessy has endured an incredible emotional journey to the realization that her own son hired hitmen to take her and her husband's lives for money. And she still loves her son, the same 8-year-old boy who lovingly hugs her in photos and races cars with his father. But that boy is gone forever, and so is the life Cary and Ted tried to build around him. Cary Shaunessy currently lives in another state under an assumed name, and every day that passes she tries to find faith again in the people around her. Indeed, many people are far from what they appear to be at first glance. A chilling thought visits us throughout our story. The 2 people who tried to kill you were living with you in your own home. Take a good look around you. An unequal marriage and a crime for millions. People who are madly in love with money but do not know how to earn it themselves can be extremely cunning and dangerous. They easily cross the boundaries of morality, ethics, and law. For them, there are no friends, relatives, or loved ones, and they are capable of any betrayal, even a crime, for money. Such was the case with a seemingly charming and sweet woman named Celeste. The case of Celeste and Stephen Beard in the early 2000s shocked the United States of America and was later widely covered in the media of other countries. The story began in a typical manner. An elderly millionaire decided to marry a young beauty who worked for him as a maid. Friends, relatives, and business partners advised Mr. Beard against this step, but he was blinded by love and genuinely believed that his feelings were mutual. Stephen was the fourth of 5 legal husbands of this cunning and greedy woman. She never loved him, but only saw him as a source of her own enrichment. In various ways, the wife forced the millionaire to change the conditions of their marriage contract so that, in case of his death, she would receive as much money and property as possible. To hasten her husband's demise while deflecting suspicion from herself, Celeste used a woman who was in love with her. Early years of Stephen Beard. Stephen Beard was born on August 11, 1924, in Dallas, Texas. He was the only child of a woman named Dolores, but never knew his biological father. He was always very close to his mother, who worked multiple jobs to provide everything necessary for her son. Stephen's childhood and youth coincided with the difficult times of the Great Depression and World War II. After finishing high school, the young man tried for some time to find a job in advertising, but soon realized that without education, it would be very difficult to get a good job, so he studied to become a marketer. However, he did not have time to apply his knowledge and practice, as he went to war, serving in the Navy until 1945. During the war years, Stephen gained an engineering specialty, but despite this, he could not find a decent job in peacetime. He managed to get a position as a sales consultant in a small shoe store in his hometown of Dallas, where he earned a very modest salary, barely enough for the essentials. Nevertheless, Stephen later called that period the happiest in his life, because he was young, full of strength, enthusiasm, and faith in a bright future. Most importantly, during his time working in the store, he met the main woman in his life, his wife, Alice Adams. The girl was 2 years younger than him, possessed striking looks, a slender figure, and was trying to build a career in the modeling business, but abandoned her ambitions to devote herself to her family. The young couple, deeply in love, got married in 1948, just a couple of months after meeting, and a year later, their eldest daughter was born. In 1950, Alice gave her husband a long-awaited son, and 3 years later, another boy was born. Their family was strong and loving, where everyone cared for and supported each other. From janitor to millionaire. In the early days of regular electronic television broadcasting, Stephen dreamed of working in the industry, but his path was challenging and filled with obstacles. In the late 1940s, he managed to get a job at one of the studios, but only as a janitor. However, the young man did not give up, continued searching, and soon luck smiled upon him. He was offered a chance to try his hand as a host of an entertainment program on a radio station, and he eagerly accepted the offer. After several years of hard work, Beard became the producer of a popular television program. His income rapidly increased, and he felt right at home in the field of mass communications and information. Stephen became an excellent specialist in advertising and entertainment content promotion, developing new ideas and brilliantly bringing them to life. He worked with many different people, made many useful connections, constantly improved himself, and strove to improve the world. By the mid-1950s, Stephen was successfully engaged not only in advertising and producing TV projects, but also invested the money he earned in real estate and started selling cars. By the age of 40, Stephen had earned his first $1 million and had no plans to stop there. In 1974, at the age of 50, Beard managed to win a tender together with the television company he founded. The businessman, along with his wife and 3 children, moved to Austin, the capital of Texas, where they bought a luxurious mansion with a large pool. Their home was located in one of the most prestigious areas of the city, covering almost 5,000 square meters. The couple joined an elite local club, membership in which cost them over $50,000 a year, but by that time, such an amount was insignificant for them. The Beards achieved incredible heights, raised 3 children, gave them an excellent education, and now simply enjoyed life. Alice continued to take great care of her appearance, exercised, and despite her age and having 3 children, maintained a slender figure. Meanwhile, Stephen rapidly gained weight and refused to do anything about it. He joked that his physique matched his social status and income level. All his wife's attempts to get him to exercise and watch his diet were met with promises to consider her advice. By the early 1990s, Beard's fortune had exceeded $10 million. The businessman and his family had virtually everything money could buy. The couple acquired their own yacht, traveled extensively, doted on their grandchildren, and were incredibly happy. It seemed that this happiness would last forever, but suddenly, tragedy struck their home. Illness and death of Alice Beard. In early 1993, Alice sought medical help due to severe migraines that had been constantly tormenting her. A thorough examination revealed a cancerous tumor in her brain. Treatment began immediately. One of the best neurosurgeons operated on Mrs. Beard, and she was prescribed expensive medications that were hard to obtain. Her husband spared no expense on innovative therapy, which offered some hope for recovery. Alice's diagnosis was a shock to the entire family, but they supported her and believed in the best. It seemed that their love, care, and advanced treatment technologies yielded results, and after 6 months, she went into remission. In August of that year, they went on a cruise to relax, celebrate their 45th wedding anniversary, and the victory over the illness. It was a wonderful, romantic, but unfortunately, their last vacation together. By late September, the insidious disease returned with renewed vigor and began to progress rapidly. Neither the best specialists nor experimental therapy could help Alice. She passed away on October 13, 1993, at the age of 68. For her family, it was an irreparable loss and a pain that nothing could alleviate. Period of depression and new love. After the passing of his beloved wife, Stephen fell into a deep depression. He lost interest in his business affairs, spent a lot of time at the bar of the upscale country club, sitting alone, drinking heavily, and just passing time to avoid returning to his empty, enormous house. By then, his children had long grown up and moved away, and his grandchildren only visited during holidays, leaving the millionaire in the mansion surrounded only by his numerous housekeepers, cooks, gardeners, and other staff. The man was visibly withering away. As a family man, he desperately needed a kindred spirit, care, and companionship. His relatives and friends were convinced that he needed a woman who would support him and be a source of comfort during such a difficult time. However, Stephen was not ready for a new relationship. At that moment, he couldn't even imagine loving someone else again. In early 1994, Beard met an attractive young woman named Celeste Martinez, who had started working as a waitress at the country club's restaurant a couple of weeks before their first meeting. She was a pretty, smiling blonde, very sociable, and able to attract attention. She was divorced and was fighting her ex-husband for custody of their twin daughters. Celeste was experiencing financial difficulties, had many debts, and told pitiful stories about her tough life. Stephen became a sympathetic listener and quickly grew fond of this girl. He genuinely felt sorry for her, wanted to help her out of her difficult situation, and offered her a job as a maid in his home, which she gladly accepted. Thus began a rather predictable romance between the elderly millionaire and the cunning beauty, who was almost 40 years younger than him. Who is Celeste Beard? Celeste Mary Johnson, maiden name matching her 5th husband's surname, has carried several surnames over time: Ratcher, Wolf, Martinez, Johnson, but became globally notorious under the surname of her 4th husband, Stephen Beard. She was born on February 13, 1963, in Culver City, California. Nothing is known about her biological parents, as her mother abandoned her immediately after she was born. At 2 days old, she was adopted by Nancy and Edwin Johnson. The couple had spent many years unsuccessfully trying to have their own children, but Nancy had repeated miscarriages, which led to a nervous breakdown that later developed into prolonged depression and resulted in a mental disorder. In the late 1950s, the Johnsons adopted 2 boys. In 1963, they took in Celeste, and a year and a half later, they adopted another girl. Over the years, Nancy's mental condition worsened and became increasingly unstable. The couple frequently argued, and their adopted children were unwilling witnesses to these fights. Nancy sank deeper into depression, repeatedly attempted to end her life, and even wanted to harm the children. Many years later, Celeste recounted that her most frightening childhood memory was bath time when she and her sister were in the bathtub, and their mother suddenly pushed their heads underwater, holding them there for a while before letting go. Nancy claimed she was just rinsing their hair, but the sisters were convinced their mother had tried to drown them, but then reconsidered. After this incident, Nancy was admitted to a psychiatric clinic following another nervous breakdown, leaving Edwin to care for the 4 children. He tried to be a good father and take care of his charges, but in her teenage years, Celeste openly accused him of constant molestation and abuse, which she claimed began when she was only 11. However, her words were hard to trust, as this story repeatedly changed, gained different details, and later, the blonde even alleged that her older brothers also committed acts of intimate violence against her. Pathological liar. Soon, the Johnsons separated and began a court battle for custody of their adopted children. Nancy claimed her husband was an alcoholic and accused him of domestic violence. Edwin, on the other hand, argued that the children couldn't be left with their mother because she was dangerous, and due to her mental issues, could harm herself and them at any moment. Celeste didn't want to stay with either of her adoptive parents, but in court, she testified against her father, accusing him of molestation, aggression, assault, and even armed attack. According to her, when she was a child, Edwin struck her in the head with a knife, causing her to nearly bleed to death. When asked to show the scar, she initially said it was hidden by her hair, then forgot where exactly she had been hit. Eventually, she claimed the scar had disappeared with age. Celeste constantly fabricated stories about her past, portraying herself as a victim. She understood this was the easiest way to attract attention, elicit pity and sympathy from others, and get what she wanted. During her teenage years, Celeste was extremely temperamental, behaved aggressively and sometimes irrationally, leading her to be taken to a psychiatrist. She was never diagnosed, with the conclusion being that it was just a difficult adolescence compounded by an unhealthy family environment. Celeste went through several more foster families, but never settled anywhere. Thanks to her striking appearance and brazen behavior, Celeste was very popular with the opposite gender from a young age. She often skipped school, preferring to spend time with boys in bars or on the beach, and in high school she dropped out altogether. Marriage to Craig Bratcher and birth of twins. At 16, Celeste met a young man named Craig Bratcher, who was only a year and a half older than her. They quickly started living together, and less than a year later, Celeste became pregnant. In December 1980, the couple had a modest wedding, and soon after, their twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina, were born. The young parents were unprepared for family life, domestic responsibilities, and raising children. They constantly argued, and Celeste didn't want to change her lifestyle. She spent her time in bars and clubs, leaving the children with Craig. She repeatedly accused Craig of domestic violence, assault, and forcing intimacy, trying to portray herself as a victim, secure a divorce, and receive monthly payments from her ex-husband. Celeste again accused her husband of abuse when he caught her in bed with a lover and threatened to end their lives. She managed to get Craig sent to jail for several months, although no one was actually harmed during that incident. The couple divorced in the spring of 1982. Celeste filed for child support. and even obtained a restraining order against her ex-husband. However, she continued to regularly leave the children with him so they wouldn't interfere with her social life. New fleeting marriages. After the divorce, Celeste wandered from one rented room to another, living off alimony and welfare, stubbornly refusing to work. She constantly took men to court, accusing them of harassment and violence, hoping to get some compensation. Celeste had no interest in her children and simply gave them to a foster family to avoid having them interfere with her lifestyle. When her ex-husband found out, he was shocked. He managed to gain custody of the children and took them in. Soon after, Celeste convinced him to try living together again. He agreed, but the reunion was short-lived. A couple of months later, Celeste again accused him of violence and took him to court. Craig even agreed to take a lie detector test, which showed he was telling the truth. After the breakup, the parents split the children. Jennifer stayed with her father, while Christina went with her mother. In 1986, Celeste married for the second time to a serviceman named Harold Wolfe. But this marriage didn't last long. Despite Harold treating her and her daughter well, life with the unstable Celeste proved unbearable. She constantly argued, threatened to end her life, and even called Harold's superiors, complaining about him, nearly ruining his career. Almost immediately after the divorce, Celeste married again. Her third husband was a wealthy top manager named Jimmy Martinez. The couple bought a spacious house in Austin, but Celeste nearly bankrupted her new husband by spending his money recklessly. When he realized she had drained his accounts and put him in debt, he tried to talk to her, but she cut her wrist with scissors. After that incident, Celeste was sent for mandatory treatment in a psychiatric clinic. The therapy did her some good, and she calmed down a bit, but it didn't save her marriage to Jimmy. She also accused her third husband of domestic violence, but he managed to have all charges dropped. Immediately after that, he filed for divorce. Fraud and incredible luck. In the early 90s, Celeste faced charges of insurance fraud involving her car. She had burned the vehicle in the desert to collect a large payout, but her scam was soon uncovered. A case was opened, but Celeste got incredibly lucky. At the hearing, she encountered a sympathetic judge who sentenced her to community service and a fine equal to the insurance payout instead of prison time. Celeste needed money, so she got a job for the first time in her life. Thanks to her striking appearance and natural charm, she was hired as a waitress at an exclusive country club, where she soon met a widowed millionaire whom she quickly began to woo. Stephen felt sorry for her and invited her to his home, which was a huge stroke of luck for her. Celeste couldn't cook or do housework, so she did everything she could to make others do these tasks for her. She quickly gained the trust of the elderly man, taking advantage of his kindness and generosity. Soon the millionaire started taking his young companion out, introducing her to his friends and partners. By then, Beard's friends were already worried, seeing how cunning and greedy this woman was. However, the businessman wouldn't listen to anyone because he was simply captivated by the beauty. But Celeste was only interested in his money, and the man himself irritated her. In conversations with her daughter, she called him unflattering names, noting that he was fat, old, and disgusting, but she was willing to endure it for financial gain. Even Celeste's ex-husbands, upon learning what was happening, tried to warn the man about who he was involved with, but he didn't believe them. Beard proposed to her, and she naturally accepted right away. However, the businessman's close friends managed to convince him to at least draw up a prenuptial agreement to retain ownership of his property and control his wife's spending. Family life and extravagant spending. On February 18, 1995, the couple officially legalized their relationship. As a wedding gift, Celeste received $500,000, had access to her husband's accounts, and was set to inherit $1 million upon his death. After the wedding, her daughter Christina moved into Beard's luxurious home, and a year later, after their father ended his life, Jennifer also moved in with her mother and stepfather. Celeste treated her husband with contempt, trying her best to undermine his health and hasten his demise. She made it a tradition to drink strong alcohol at dinner, adding sleeping pills to Stephen's drinks and food so he would fall asleep, allowing her to go out to entertainment venues. Meanwhile, she constantly thought about how to change the prenuptial agreement to maximize her inheritance after Beard's death. She convinced her husband to sell their house and buy another, arguing that she felt uncomfortable living where Stephen had spent many years with Alice. In reality, the scheming blonde wanted property acquired during the marriage. But this wasn't enough, and she began spending money from her millionaire husband's accounts. In the first month of their married life, Celeste spent over $100,000 on entertainment, shopping, and other personal needs. Her husband was bewildered, as no matter how much money he gave her, it was never enough. Moreover, Celeste stole and pawned jewelry that had belonged to the late Alice. When Stephen found out, he was so furious that he wanted not only to divorce her, but also to send her to jail. However, Celeste begged for forgiveness, telling him about her debts and the need to pay a fine for the insurance fraud case. The man believed her, helped pay off her debts, and decided to keep the marriage. Attempted murder. On October 2nd, 1999, around 3 a.m, a frightened man called emergency services, unable to explain what was happening. He said he woke up from a sharp burning pain in his abdomen, saw that his clothes and bed were covered in blood, and his internal organs were literally spilling out, which he was holding in with his hand. The man also said his wife was somewhere in the house, but he couldn't call out to her and was just bleeding out in his bedroom. The caller was Stephen, who truly had no idea what had happened to him, but understood that without immediate help, he would die. Fortunately, within minutes, paramedics and police arrived at the mansion and saw a horrifying scene. An elderly man sat in a chair covered in blood, holding the phone in one hand and trying to stem the blood flow from his abdomen with the other. They asked him if he had recently undergone surgery and if his stitches might have come apart, to which he responded negatively. Soon, Celeste and Christina appeared, seemingly unaware of what was happening, but they remained calm upon learning about the incident. They confirmed that Stephen had not undergone any surgeries, and he was taken to the hospital. This is where things got interesting, as it turned out that the businessman had been shot in the stomach while he slept. In his bedroom, police found a shotgun shell on the floor and sealed the room as a crime scene, declaring it an attempted murder. The first suspect was Mrs. Beard, but she claimed she was in another wing of the mansion at the time, and her daughters corroborated her story. Soon it was revealed that during her second stay in a psychiatric hospital, Celeste had met a woman named Tracy Tarleton, who was also a patient. They quickly developed a close relationship, and Celeste hinted that she would leave her husband if it weren't for him being a tyrant. Tracy took these words as a call to action and decided to remove the obstacle. Investigation, trial, and sentences. Tarleton didn't even try to hide. The shotgun she used was found in her home. Celeste vehemently denied her involvement, claiming that this woman was obsessed with her and acted alone. The accused chose to remain silent. Stephen survived, gradually recovered, and was soon discharged home. However, on January 22, 2000, he suddenly passed away due to a blood clot that had formed after the gunshot wound. Now, Tracy was no longer charged with attempted murder, but with the crime itself. Yet she remained silent until July of that same year, when the newly wealthy widow Celeste married Cole Johnson. Almost immediately after Celeste's fifth marriage, Tracy began testifying against her. She admitted her guilt in Stephen's death, but noted that she was driven to such a desperate act by her lover, who had promised they could be together after the man's demise. However, after eliminating her old husband with someone else's hands and inheriting his fortune, Celeste quickly married another man. Celeste denied all accusations against her, but everyone testified against her in court, even her own daughters, who confirmed that their mother never loved her fourth husband and wished him dead to inherit his wealth sooner. Tracy made a deal with the prosecution and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She was released in August 2011. In the spring of 2003, Celeste Johnson was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole no earlier than 40 years. It was revealed that she also planned to get rid of Tarleton and was seeking a criminal to silence her lover and avoid punishment. Imagine that today we will visit a Hollywood movie studio where they shoot the best movies in the world of different genres. But instead of a movie pavilion, we will find ourselves in Wilbur, Nebraska, and our movie for today is a bloody thriller. Nebraska is the territory of the Great Plains. It is located in Tornado Alley. In spring and summer, there are often severe thunderstorms and tornadoes. Nebraska is the only tri-state that is landlocked, which means to get from Nebraska to the ocean, bay, you have to cross 3 states. Passing motorists don't like to stop on a dark country road. But a flat tire forced Michael to make a stop on a remote dark highway. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. As he walked around the car, his attention was drawn to a large black bag, the kind used for throwing out garbage, but the bag had an unusual shape. Michael returned to the car, took a flashlight from the glove compartment, and illuminated the bag. It was torn open. There was a stain on the ground around it. Something had leaked out of it, and something light-colored was flickering out of the holes. Moving closer, the man froze at what he saw. A human hand was sticking out of the bag. A call to the emergency services raised the whole town. A few minutes later, investigators arrived on the country highway and thoroughly inspected the area. They confirmed that the package they found contained human remains. The package was sent for examination, and the searchers continued to comb the surrounding area. The recovered remains were soon identified. The victim was 24-year-old Cindy Loof. Sydney Irene Luff was born on August 21st, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska. She grew up in Arcadia with her parents George and Susie Luff. Sydney's family moved to Nebraska in 2000, at which time she was in 2nd grade. Her mother Susie was a special education teacher, and her father George was the school principal. Sydney was always a very active child. The girl had a normal, happy childhood filled with a love of nature. She loved fishing, which her father always took her to. During her school years, Cindy played basketball and golf, where she made good progress, but developed scoliosis, curvature of the spine, forced to give up many of her favorite hobbies and put a cross on her sports career. In 2011, after graduating from high school, Sydney got a job at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. The Loofs were a close-knit family, and when Sydney had to move from Norfolk to Lincoln because of work, they all made sure to keep in touch almost every day and often met for dinner. Even though Sydney lived separately, she often returned home to her parents' house. But lately, Sydney had been struggling with depression and felt that the medications she was taking were only making things worse. Susie was very worried about her daughter and recommended a new doctor for her. He prescribed her various medications. In phone conversations with her mom, Sydney told how her inner state was getting back to normal, her voice sounding quite optimistic. She was trying to make some changes in her life and was looking for a new job. For a young woman, working in a store was not the limit of her dreams. She did not know what she wanted to become or what to do with her career, and these worries led to a rather depressive state. In November 2017, her mental state deteriorated to the point where she started taking antidepressants and sometimes allowed herself to smoke pot. Her family and friends were supportive in every way possible, but she wanted not only companionship, but also love. Being young and modern, Sydney had an interest in the female gender, so she would sometimes look for other girls on social media for dating purposes. To find a friend, Sydney used Tinder, an app that allows millions of people around the world to find, fall in love, and date. In November 2017, she found a girl named Audrey, and the girl replied to her. They began to correspond. The girls found many common interests, such as gambling, hiking, and delicious food. Already after 100 messages, they decided to meet. On November 14th, Sydney headed over to Audrey's house to Wilbur. Their first meeting went so well that Sydney was very happy. They liked each other and agreed to meet again at Audrey's house. On November 15th, Sydney worked her shift at the store and went home. She cleaned herself up, styled her hair, and did her makeup. Before going out, she took a photo and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." After the photo, she got a message to go out, with Audrey waiting for her in the car. The girls drove off. The next day, Sydney Loof didn't show up for work. But even though she had been in high spirits for the past few days because of her new acquaintance, her family was concerned when co-workers informed them that she didn't show up for work because it was nothing like their responsible Sydney. Susie spoke of her daughter suffering from anxiety and deep depression. Just days before her disappearance, Loof had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Loof's family saw Sydney. The girl's parents went to her apartment and were extremely surprised that Sydney had left her favorite cat Mimsy without food or water. This was extremely unlike a caring landlady. The parents knew how much Sydney loved her cat and never left her alone for long. They were concerned and reported Sydney missing to the police. The apartment itself was locked. When the police did a welfare check of Sydney's home, they saw nothing out of the ordinary. But the family was adamant. Something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, the 5'7" blonde was reported missing after she failed to show up at the showroom of the Menard store where she worked, at 27th Street and Cornhusker Highway. Sydney suffered from a spinal condition and walked in a different way that would make her stand out from the crowd. She was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. When testifying about the prior events before she went missing, her parents told police that she told her friend on Snapchat Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a woman she met online Tuesday night and planned to meet up with her again Wednesday night. Sydney's car, which she left in northeast Lincoln, was found. Police officers said they have conducted interviews and were looking for any leads that could lead to Sydney or her trail. Loof's family distributed flyers saying she may have been abducted 40 miles southwest of Lincoln, where the latest information indicated her cell phone was communicating with a tower. The flyer also noted that there was no activity in her bank account and that her cell phone was turned off the night she disappeared. The flyers gave a description of the young woman and distinguishing features such as several tattoos, one on her arm with the words, "Everything will be great someday," a yin-yang sign under her elbow, and the word "believe" on her wrist. Anyone with information on Sydney Loof's whereabouts has been asked to contact police by phone. A huge appeal to find Sydney was launched, which included highway billboards with the girl's picture, and a manhunt was also launched on the TV news. Susie persisted in claiming that something had happened to Sydney after the date her daughter had gone on. To prove her point, she took a screenshot of a post that Sydney posted on Snapchat with her picture and the caption, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was going on a date with a woman she met through Tinder named Audrey. During the search, police reviewed Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from the store where she worked and quickly identified the person they wanted to talk to. The last time Sydney's phone rang a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, probably not far from Audrey's home, but police had no idea who she was. Authorities began searching for a woman named Audrey, the last person to see Sydney alive, but no one knew how to find her because no one knew who she was or if she had a real name. To the police's rescue came Sydney's friend Brooklyn, who decided to find Audrey herself through Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Audrey, and exchanged phone numbers with her. That's how police learned Audrey's real name. She turned out to be 26-year-old Bailey Boswell. It turned out that Bailey's apartment is within reach of the very cell tower where Sydney's phone was last seen connected to the tower. It also became known that this apartment Bailey shared with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. So who are Bailey and Aubrey? Bailey Boswell grew up in Lyons, Iowa. She grew up in a wholesome, normal family, was a friendly kid, and did well in school. Bailey had success in basketball and was an excellent runner. However, after losing her father, her life changed direction, and after graduating from high school, Bailey went down the wrong path. Bad company, alcohol, and illicit drugs came into her life. On one of the dating websites, she met Aubrey after a looking for a daddy status. Aubrey Trail had a depressing past. He had multiple fraud charges, fraudulent check fraud, and theft. Aubrey created his own cult where he called himself the Vampire Daddy. He paid women $200 a week to follow his rules. The rules were strange enough, but there were women who believed Aubrey. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey were ordered by the court to pay over $400,000 for fraud. They also had numerous misdemeanors on the two of them, but the couple managed to go on the run. On November 19, 2017, after obtaining a warrant, police searched Bailey and Aubrey's home. An inspection of the apartment revealed that some of the walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which was confirmed by a neighbor who had noticed the acrid smell of chlorinated substances 2 days earlier. Police actively began searching for the suspects. While on the run, they posted videos on Facebook saying they had no involvement in Sydney's disappearance and hoped for her safe return. Bailey claimed she went on 2 dates with Sydney, but dropped her off at a friend's house and never heard from her again. She said, "I just want Sydney's family to know that I'm really sorry, but I had nothing to do with it. I hope Sydney is found very soon. She's a lovely, amazing girl." It took police a few days to track down the couple, but they eventually found them at a hotel in Branson, Missouri. Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail were taken into custody. A few weeks after Sydney was reported missing, after carefully analyzing phone records and Bailey's location records, police discovered Sydney's remains. She had been dismembered. Her body had been cut into 14 pieces, and police found 13 of her body parts in black plastic garbage bags in ditches in Clay County. Some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. This is just horrific. A total of 16 crime scenes were found with Sydney's remains or personal belongings. Her car keys, driver's license, phone case were found along the highway. All the routes matched the movements of the two perpetrators. Forensics conducted autopsies on 13 body parts that were found. There were abrasions on Sydney's wrists, a bump on her head, torn earlobes, abrasions and contusions on her back. There were wounds on her body indicating that Sydney had fought for her life. The heartbreaking discovery shocked not only Sydney Loof's family and friends, but all of Nebraska. On December 11, 2017, the Loof family held a private funeral for Sydney at the Lutheran church the girl attended during her lifetime. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey also pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but pleaded guilty to improper disposal of human remains. Each successive deposition of Aubrey differed from the previous one. The man was constantly confused, changing the course of action and adding different actors. When Aubrey first talked to the police after his arrest, he told them about the cult he and Bailey were involved in. He talked about witchcraft and told them that he was a vampire who could fly. Aubrey portrayed himself as the leader of this cult and a vampire, and assured them that he had witches in the cult who had to kill another woman to get powers. So at one of his first court hearings, he admitted that he killed Sydney Loof, but did it completely by accident. He said that he paid her $5,000 to fulfill his intimate fantasy with 2 other women. Sydney agreed, but died accidentally during the intimate act when he accidentally strangled her with a cord. He also admitted that he disposed of the body by cutting her into pieces, as it was a ritual in accordance with his religious beliefs. He had to drain all the blood to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place and lay out her body parts to help her reincarnate faster. But this version turned out to be false. Surveillance footage provided, dated November 14th, shows Bailey and Aubrey checking into a hotel in Lincoln, not far from where Sydney lives. And then, on November 15th, they visit a home improvement store, which shows them buying a gruesome array of tools: a hacksaw, chlorine bleach, a folding saw, a stationery knife, and the bags used for Sydney's remains. On November 15th at 12:01 in the afternoon, A surveillance camera captured Sidney crossing paths with Aubrey at the Menards store during business hours, but the girl had no idea at the time who he was or how cruelly fate would play her. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing was held for the murder and improper burial of Sidney Loof's remains. Separate trials were ordered, but the charge was essentially the same for both. The trials were held in Lexington because attorneys argued that Bailey and Aubrey would not get a fair trial in Wilbur because of the publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution argued that Sidney was murdered. She was strangled, and the crime was a premeditated attack that was carefully planned. Aubrey and Bailey were declared ringleaders of a group that was interested in recruiting young women for intimate games. Bailey therefore used Tinder to find the women. At trial, the jury heard testimony from 3 other women who said they had been in relationships with Aubrey and Bailey at different times, and their acquaintance also began on Tinder. All of them had been involved with Bailey and had participated in intimate acts with Bailey and Aubrey. One woman said she even traveled with them after they met. She said Aubrey gave her a weekly allowance of $200 and invited her to join his cult. He called the cult members witches and said she had to torture and kill someone to join them. She testified that Bailey was called a witch queen. Another woman testified that Bailey talked in great detail about breaking her fingers and her desire to dismember the body. She liked to talk about torture. All 3 women who testified made it clear that both Bailey and Aubrey were involved in all the talk about torture and the crime. It is quite strange that in our modern world, there are still people who believe in the horrors of exorcism and try to assure the rest of us that they do. Talking about the investigation and the evidence obtained, the prosecution reconstructed the picture of what happened on the tragic evening of November 15, 2017. Sidney was getting ready for a date with a woman she had known for a couple days. They texted on Tinder and Bailey picked Sidney up from her apartment. They went for a ride in Bailey's car. After a while, the car stopped at Bailey's house, where Sidney was lured into the apartment. There, Bailey and Aubrey pounced on her as soon as she went inside and strangled her with an extension cord on the living room floor. The apartment was then thoroughly cleaned out by Bailey and Aubrey, a part the prosecution alleged was also pre-planned. They then cut Sidney into pieces and dumped her remains in Clay County the next day, November 16th. The court heard from their landlord, Jennifer Call, who testified that on November 16th, as soon as she drove into the garage, she smelled chlorine and the odor intensified when she entered the house. According to the medical examiner's testimony, Sidney's death was ruled a homicide, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. Toxicology reports indicated that Sidney had antidepressants in her system. The court learned that in addition to the missing organs, the part of Sidney's body that was not found was her upper left arm, the part just above the elbow and below the shoulder. Prosecutors had demanded the death penalty for both criminals, and the case would be retried if the sentence was unjust. But Aubrey, once again, denied involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying the remains. At one point during Aubrey's trial, he shouted that Bailey had nothing to do with Sidney's death. "Bailey is innocent, damn you all." He then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade. He survived and was remanded into custody until he made a full recovery. After that, he did not attend court for several weeks. The next time he entered the courtroom was during the defense phase and only when he was scheduled to testify. When he was brought into court, he smirked and told the judge, "I'll be good." It is unusual for a defendant to testify at his own trial. Usually, defense attorneys advise the defendant not to testify because it may cause more problems for him on cross-examination. Some reveal too much, some can't answer questions straightforwardly, and some are hostile to attorneys asking questions, which creates a bad impression for jurors. But this was not unusual in Aubrey's case, as he had many interactions with police after his arrest. He had given the police his version of events, and at trial, he wanted to change his story. Therefore, the court needed to hear his new version of events. He decided to skip the rest of the trial and only returned for the last hearing with his horrible scars clearly visible when he testified in his defense. Aubrey Trail took the stand and shocked his attorneys by admitting that he had previously lied to authorities and his own legal team about the death of Sidney Loof. In a new version of the testimony he gave, he admitted that they met with Sidney in March 2017 and he paid her to participate in his illegal activities because she needed the money. He said they did not keep in touch, but in November 2017, Bailey wanted to rekindle the relationship and she contacted Sidney again. Sidney needed money, and Aubrey said that's why he was in Menards that day, November 15th. He offered her $5,000 to be part of his antique gang. The three of them ended up engaging in an intimate act later that night, and Sidney accidentally choked to death because of the extension cord they used in their games. "I don't know if Sidney had a seizure or something, but that's when she stopped breathing," said Aubrey. He told the court that there was no ritual involved in cutting up Sidney's body, and all the talk of witches, vampires, and blood-sucking was simply not true. He confessed that he only dismembered her because he couldn't put her body in the car. He said he panicked and dumped her body in a Clay County field as soon as dawn broke on the morning of November 16th. When asked why he didn't seek help if her death was accidental, he said no one would believe him. Aubrey admitted to disposing of Sidney's body, but claimed her death was accidental when they used an extension cord during their games. At Bailey's trial, she admitted to nothing. In fact, her attorneys argued that she was also victimized by Aubrey. Her attorney told the court that when she met Aubrey, she was a vulnerable young woman. At the time, she was living alone, working as a waitress in Princeton, Missouri. The defense argued that Bailey had nothing to do with either Sidney's death or the disposition of her remains, but that again proved to be false. The cell phone that Bailey used to access her Tinder account was used near where Sidney's body parts were found, and it was through a detailed analysis of her phone and location records that the police were able to find all of Sidney's remains. The court also learned that it was Bailey who contacted Sidney and arranged to meet her. She was the one who drove to Sidney's duplex to pick her up on the evening of November 15th. The prosecution told the court that Bailey derived satisfaction from discussing acts of cruelty, and she enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence was presented at trial proving a planned crime. On the day Sidney was killed, Aubrey and Bailey were together at a store where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter from Home Depot. Around noon that day, Bailey sent Sidney a text message asking how her day was going. Phone records and surveillance footage show that Bailey was in the Menards parking lot with Aubrey when she sent that text message on Tinder. And although Sidney worked at Menards, it appears she was unaware that Bailey was there. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sidney another message on Tinder, alerting her that she was at her apartment and ready to pick her up soon. Phone records indicate that instead of going on a date, as Sidney believed, they went to the apartment where Bailey and Aubrey lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that as to Bailey, the evidence showed that Bailey was guilty of purchasing bleach and garbage bags to use to dispose of Sidney's body, and as such, she could be charged with aiding and abetting the improper disposal of human remains. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison. The Loof family had been seeking justice for 3 years, mourning and longing for their Sidney, and they awaited a judgment that gave them comfort. On July 11, 2019, it took a jury less than 3 hours to find Aubrey Trail guilty of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. The 3-judge panel called his crime cold and calculated. In a second phase of the trial to determine whether he should be executed, county prosecutors kept their promise and secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail. Thus, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was executed by lethal injection. The con man, accused of a brutal crime against Nebraska woman Sidney Loof, allegedly convinced members of his cult that he was a flying, mind-reading vampire with a coven of a dozen witches who he claimed would get their powers by killing people. But thankfully, in real-life stories, justice prevails, and in our story, the trial brought the monster to the end of his trail in our world. The case of Kelsey Turner, how a Playboy model and single mother became a convicted criminal. Boundless greed, selfishness, and the pursuit of easy wealth often drive people to commit horrific acts and crimes. The story of Kelsey Turner, a former American model who appeared in popular men's magazines like Maxim and Playboy, serves as a stark example of this. The crime she committed with several accomplices shocked the public with its brutality, ruthlessness, and lack of logic. The young woman, who aspired to a life of beauty, carefree ease, and affluence, not only lost everything she had, but also ended up behind bars. In Turner's case, the most tragic aspect is that the victim of the bloody act orchestrated by the blonde was a well-known and respected psychiatrist, Dr. Thomas Burchard, renowned for his successful long-term practice and numerous scholarly works. He was also known for his boundless generosity. The doctor was involved in charity work, helping sick children and single mothers. His good deeds ultimately cost him his life. All the participants in these events stood trial and are now serving their sentences in correctional facilities. Let's go back a few years to understand how and why the elderly doctor, who dedicated his life to helping others, met his end. The downfall of Kelsey Turner, a model and single mother. Kelsey Nicole Turner, née Ingram, was born on March 5, 1993, in the port city of Norfolk, Virginia. She was the second child of Samantha Ingram, a would-be model and dancer, and Christopher Ingram, a simple laborer. Kelsey grew up alongside her older brother, Colin. Shortly after Kelsey's birth, the family moved to the small industrial town of Jonesboro, Arkansas, where she spent most of her childhood. A few years later, her parents divorced. Her father returned to Virginia and largely lost contact with his former wife and their children. Kelsey grew into a striking beauty with a perfect figure and model looks. School didn't interest her much. She was more into parties with friends, dating, and attending various events. She dreamed of fame, gracing magazine covers, giving interviews, and walking red carpets. However, Kelsey lacked any real talent. Her youth and good looks were her only assets. In high school, she began attending castings, hoping to become a model. Her mother, Samantha, who once aspired to be a model herself, enthusiastically supported her daughter's endeavors. Kelsey managed only a couple of shoots for clothing catalogs. At 18, Kelsey married Jerry Turner. She was already pregnant at their wedding and soon gave birth to a daughter, Beverly. Despite the arrival of their child, the marriage was short-lived, ending in divorce. By the age of 20, having given up on runway modeling, Kelsey decided to pursue a career as a men's magazine model. She created a portfolio with provocative photos and sent them to various publications, soon catching the attention of several men's magazines. Kelsey saw this as the beginning of a dazzling career and her ticket to the glamorous, carefree life she had always dreamed of. For a few years, she regularly received shooting offers. She eagerly gave interviews, attended events, and tried to make valuable connections. However, her career highlights were one-off shoots for Playboy and Maxim and a photo session, an interview for 110 magazine. She traveled to Los Angeles and Las Vegas for these opportunities. In an interview, Kelsey candidly described herself saying, "I'm a blonde with a busty figure and a slim waist. What more do you need for happiness?" She added that she loved partying, spending time with friends, and living it up because life is short, and it should be lived beautifully and joyfully. Kelsey wasn't overly concerned about the future, frequently changed lovers, and quickly spent any money she earned or received from admirers. At 23, Kelsey became pregnant again and gave birth to a son, Josh. The child's father didn't want to marry her or acknowledge his offspring. As modeling offers dwindled, Kelsey turned to social media to build an audience. She actively managed her accounts, posting revealing photos in swimsuits, lingerie, or barely covering her intimate areas. To be fair, these images were heavily edited, making her resemble a Barbie doll. She also loved to share shots taken in fashionable boutiques, popular nightclubs, and other glamorous spots and entertainment venues. Kelsey's social media profiles created an illusion of a wealthy, successful, and carefree life. It seemed the beauty had everything and was simply enjoying life to the fullest. In reality, the single mother of 2 small children was struggling to make ends meet, but never learned to manage her finances wisely, spending any money she received on the very day she got it. Around 2016, Kelsey faced serious issues after an unfortunate incident involving her daughter. The girl was physically unharmed, but severely traumatized and became withdrawn and mute. Therapy was recommended, along with sessions with renowned child psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Burchard, who practiced in Monterey, California. This fateful encounter led years later to a terrible tragedy. Who was Dr. Thomas Burchard? Dr. Thomas Kirk Burchard was born on February 16, 1948, in Boston, Massachusetts, to a family of a well-known architect and engineer. Later, his family moved to Virginia, where his father taught architecture at Harvard and the Architectural College at the Technological Institute. This is where the future psychiatrist spent his childhood and youth. Choosing not to follow in his father's footsteps, the young Thomas decided to pursue a career in medicine, specifically specializing in child psychology. After graduating from medical school and defending his thesis, he worked as a pediatric psychiatry resident in various renowned hospitals and lectured at colleges across the country. Eventually, Dr. Burchard was employed at a public clinical hospital on the Monterey Peninsula in California, where he worked for over 40 years as an incredibly sought-after pediatric psychiatrist. Dr. Burchard had an impeccable reputation. He easily connected with his young patients and took on even the most challenging and severe cases. He earned his doctorate from the University of California, Berkeley. According to Google Scholar, he had over 300 scientific publications, which were cited almost 40,000 times in total, and his Hirsch Index, a scientific productivity metric, was 81. Moreover, Dr. Thomas was known for being kind, responsive, and incredibly generous. His compassionate nature drove him to help those in need, particularly focusing on his young patients whose parents couldn't afford sessions. He also paid for hospital treatments for sick children from low-income families and assisted single mothers. Dr. Burchard lived for a long time with a woman named Judy Earp, who is variously described as his assistant and housekeeper, or as his lover and even fiancée. Regardless, she knew him better than anyone else, and was the first to notice certain peculiarities in his behavior indicative of early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. The elderly doctor, approaching his 70th birthday, became forgetful, absent-minded, and inattentive. He meticulously tried to hide this from his colleagues, constantly keeping diaries and notebooks where he recorded every detail, especially names, dates, and events, to avoid confusion. He always carried one of these notebooks in his breast pocket, containing his banking details, account numbers, passwords, and card pins. Another notable aspect of Burchard's behavior was that he, already a generous person, became very trusting, and the financial assistance he provided to those in need increased from hundreds to thousands of dollars. Dr. Thomas Burchard, a windfall for Kelsey Turner. When Kelsey first brought her daughter to Dr. Burchard's office, she lamented that she was raising 2 children alone and likely couldn't afford his costly services. To her surprise, the doctor offered to help her child for free, and after the appointment, gave the struggling single mother $300 for her children's needs. The blonde was astonished, but quickly realized that with tearful stories about her challenging life, she could extract more funds from the elderly man. At the next session, Kelsey, having prepared in advance, put on a whole performance, tearfully telling Dr. Burchard about her younger son's illness and lack of funds for expensive medications. This time, she boldly stated a fabricated amount and received it in full. Kelsey couldn't believe her luck. From then on, she regularly concocted tearful stories, extracting increasingly large sums of money from the trusting older man. Naturally, she spent the money not on her children, but on her own entertainment, designer clothes, as well as visits to cosmetologists and plastic surgeons. Unwilling to return to her native Virginia, Kelsey asked Thomas to pay for her rental housing in California, arguing it would be easier to find a job there, and the local climate was better for her children. It didn't take much to persuade the doctor, who simply paid the necessary amount for the apartment Kelsey liked. There were rumors that the odd pair were intimately involved, and this was why the elderly, respected doctor indulged every whim of the striking young blonde. While these rumors might have some basis, the men's magazine model claimed that Thomas had purely paternal feelings towards her and her children and helped selflessly. This was also echoed in court by Judy Earp, albeit with the caveat that Turner shamelessly exploited the doctor's kindness and his progressing dementia. It's worth noting that in addition to paying for rental housing, bills, and simply handing out large sums of cash for necessities, Thomas also rented a car for the young woman. However, it wasn't a practical family minivan suitable for safely transporting children, but a luxurious Mercedes-Benz convertible. Eventually, Kelsey realized that her modeling career was behind her, her youth was fading, and offers for shoots had ceased entirely. Yet, she didn't consider burdening herself with any other job, living instead on the largesse of her elderly benefactor. Attempts to break free, blackmail, and threats. Over nearly 3 years of this peculiar relationship, Dr. Burchard spent around $500,000 on the blonde and her children. However, Kelsey squandered all the money, undergoing breast augmentation and liposuction in hopes of reigniting her modeling career. She indulged in endless luxuries, while her children were largely neglected amid her non-stop partying. This led to Kelsey's ex-husband successfully gaining sole custody of their daughter through the court, stripping Kelsey of her parental rights. This left her with only her younger son, whose father, as mentioned earlier, had never shown any interest in his child. When Thomas learned about this development, he was furious, not with the girl's ex-husband, but with Kelsey herself. He realized that she was a negligent mother who did not bother to care for her children and spent all the money meant for them on her own needs, entertainment, and outfits. Dr. Burchard decided to have a serious talk with Kelsey, informing her that he would no longer sponsor her lavish and idle lifestyle. In response, Kelsey threatened to spread rumors that the respected child psychiatrist harbored inappropriate intimate interests in his young patients. Of course, this was a falsehood, but any gossip on the matter could severely damage the reputation of the esteemed doctor and academic. Reluctantly, Burchard agreed to Kelsey's terms and continued to transfer money and pay her bills. In early 2019, Kelsey decided to move to Las Vegas with her son to try and revive her modeling career. Naturally, she expected Thomas, whom she continued to blackmail, to finance this venture. The doctor rented a house Kelsey had chosen and transferred the amount of money she requested. After this, Kelsey disappeared for 2 months, giving no sign of her whereabouts. The fateful trip. In late February 2019, Kelsey Turner resurfaced as she was running out of money. She called Thomas, sobbing, and began to tell him about her severe illness, inability to work, and struggled to provide for her son. However, when the doctor refused to help, Kelsey's tone changed abruptly, and she started threatening and blackmailing him again. It's important to note that Judy Earp had long been urging Dr. Burchard to report Kelsey to the police, revealing her blackmail and extortion. Judy also suggested involving Child Protective Services, given that Kelsey, already stripped of her parental rights over her older daughter, was incapable of adequately caring for her young son. In case the matter went to court, Dr. Burchard secured support from his colleagues, who were informed about the situation and promised to back him up. Earlier, Judy even tried to talk to Kelsey herself, hoping to persuade her to leave Thomas alone, but was only met with threats of retaliation. This time, Dr. Burchard decided to go to Las Vegas himself to verify Kelsey's claims, though he already knew the answer. Judy tried to dissuade him from the trip, but the elderly man was adamant. She then urged him to take her or one of his friends along. However, Thomas insisted that it was his personal problem and that he needed to resolve it himself. He embarked on his journey on March 1st, 2019. A body in the trunk amidst the desert. On the morning of March 7th, a group of tourists traveling through Nevada deviated from the main highway onto a dirt road leading to Lake Mead. En route, they spotted a solitary Mercedes-Benz convertible parked in the middle of the desert with its windows up and roof closed. The absence of anyone nearby seemed odd and suspicious. Driven by curiosity, the travelers approached and noticed one of the car windows was shattered. Peering inside, they discovered signs of a struggle, with bloodstains throughout the interior. The tourists immediately reported their grim discovery to the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene around noon, under the scorching sun, and were instantly hit by an unbearable stench of decay. The source was quickly identified when the police opened the trunk. Beneath a pile of items and rags lay the lifeless body of an elderly man, next to him a blood-stained baseball bat. You may have guessed that the body belonged to Dr. Burchard, who had been missing for 5 days by that point. Judy had reported his disappearance on March 2nd when she couldn't reach Thomas at their scheduled time. She instantly feared something terrible had happened and promptly contacted the police, hoping he would be found alive. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The autopsy revealed numerous injuries on the elderly man's body, including abrasions, bruises, and superficial cuts. He had sustained several severe head injuries, likely inflicted with the baseball bat found beside him in the trunk. Part of his ear had been severed, and his hands bore numerous cuts indicating a desperate attempt at defense. Also notable were bruises on his face with a peculiar imprinted pattern. Most horrifyingly, it seemed the man had been placed in the trunk while wounded but still alive, and had slowly suffocated under the intense desert sun. Main suspects and crime scene investigation. Since the car found at the scene was rented in Kelsey Turner's name, she immediately became the primary suspect. Judy provided the police with the address where the blonde lived and where the deceased doctor had headed, as the house was rented in his name. However, upon arrival, the police found no one there. Inside, containers of cleaning agents were scattered everywhere, and the air was still thick with the scent of household chemicals. It was clear that a hasty cleanup had been attempted to erase any evidence of the crime. The house was occupied by Turner, her 4-year-old son, and her new boyfriend, John Logan Kennison, along with 2 neighbors, Diana Pina and Jeremy Esherick. All had fled, making them suspects, as the petite blonde couldn't have inflicted such injuries on the doctor or placed his body in the car trunk by herself. The only person police managed to interview was Jeremy. He and his girlfriend, who had been visiting him, left the house while the doctor was still alive and unharmed. Jeremy recounted that his girlfriend had drunk too much and flirted with the doctor, attempting to get a couple of $100, mimicking Kelsey's tactics. Kelsey became enraged, accusing the woman of trying to steal Thomas from her. The 2 women almost fought, and Jeremy had to quickly take his girlfriend away from the house. He hadn't returned for several days and was unaware of the subsequent events. Police also learned from Judy that Dr. Burchard always carried a notebook with bank account details and passwords, which he often forgot. This notebook was missing, and large sums of money were withdrawn from 2 of his accounts on March 3rd. The accounts and cards were immediately blocked, and on March 21st, in Stockton, California, Kelsey and her boyfriend John were arrested after another attempt to withdraw money. For nearly 3 weeks, the couple, along with their child, had been hiding in motels, moving from place to place and paying in cash. They regretted not completely emptying Burchard's accounts initially and decided to do so later, planning to flee to Mexico with the money. However, by the time they tried again, the accounts were blocked, and the police arrived promptly. Reconstructing the timeline of events. While Kelsey and John adamantly denied any wrongdoing, a third participant in the events, Diana, voluntarily surrendered to the police and narrated what transpired on the night of March 2nd. According to her, after Jeremy and his girlfriend left, Turner had a severe altercation with Dr. Burchard, angered by his declaration that he would not give her another cent. She threatened to tarnish his reputation by spreading rumors about the psychiatrist's inappropriate behavior with his young patients. As Kelsey became physically aggressive, the elderly man locked himself in a room. John, with a forceful shoulder thrust, broke down the door and severely struck the older man with a bat, causing a massive hematoma and a nosebleed. Diana rushed in, pleading for everyone to calm down. Seeing Thomas's condition, she urged them to take him to the hospital, fearing the consequences of their actions. After extracting a promise from the doctor that he would tell the police he was attacked and robbed by strangers, all 4 drove to the garage. Burchard was seated in the back of the car. Kelsey then instructed Diana to return to the house and clean up thoroughly, erasing all blood traces. Diana obediently started the cleanup, but soon heard Dr. Burchard's cries and the sounds of a struggle. Rushing back to the garage, she saw the couple brutally assaulting the elderly man, trapped between them in the car, unable to escape or defend himself. It turned out that Kelsey and Kennison never intended to take the man to the hospital. They planned to finish him off using the bat and a small knife, inflicting cuts. John also repeatedly hit the doctor in the face with the handle of his unloaded pistol, causing the peculiar patterned bruises. Diana was again ordered back to the house to continue cleaning. Fearing she might be next if she didn't comply, she left the garage. While she was still cleaning inside, she heard car engines and saw the couple's 2 vehicles leaving. A few hours later, only John's car returned, with Kelsey accompanying him. Diana remained unaware of the convertible's whereabouts until news reports surfaced about a car found in the desert with a body in the trunk. Trial and sentence. From the outset, Diana opted for a plea deal, agreeing to tell everything she knew. This helped her avoid charges of complicity, leading to a lighter sentence for evidence tampering, which resulted in only 3 years of imprisonment. The former lovers, on the other hand, stubbornly shifted the blame onto each other. However, proving their guilt was straightforward, as they left substantial evidence in the car, and their phones were traced to the desert on the night of March 2nd, at the location where they abandoned the car with the body. Kennison was found guilty of second-degree homicide and sentenced to 45 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. The situation with Turner was more complex. Shortly after her arrest, she declared her pregnancy, significantly delaying the trial. During her incarceration, she gave birth to a girl who, along with her son, was placed under the care of social services, as none of Turner's relatives were willing to assume such responsibility. In January 2023, following her attorney's advice, Kelsey admitted her guilt and was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole no earlier than after 10 years. She is currently serving her sentence at the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center in Las Vegas. In conclusion, it's worth noting that in February 2023, ABC's documentary series 20/20 Inches aired an episode titled A Model Murder, detailing the heinous crime committed by Turner and her boyfriend against Dr. Burchard. A lot of people enjoy traveling solo without worrying that something bad could happen. The main perks are the total freedom to do whatever you want, the ability to quickly adjust plans, and the rare chance to spend time alone with your own thoughts and feelings. However, alongside these benefits, there are also plenty of risks, especially for women who decide to take solo trips. The tragic story of Maria Luisa Cedeño, which happened in 2020 in Costa Rica, shocked the entire country and later made headlines internationally. The case drew widespread attention because it occurred at an expensive hotel in a popular resort area, and the victim was a well-known doctor who headed the anesthesiology department at one of the country's largest medical centers. Who was Maria Luisa Cedeño? Maria Luisa Cedeño was born on May 29, 1977, in La Fortuna, San Carlos, in the province of Alajuela, Costa Rica. She was the youngest of 5 children in a modest family. Her relatives were all simple workers with no education beyond what they got in school. From a young age, Maria Luisa was ambitious and very determined. She wanted to help others and dreamed of becoming a doctor, promising herself she'd be the first in her family to get a college degree. In school, her favorite subjects were chemistry and biology, and after graduating in 1994, she was accepted into the medical school at the most prestigious university in the country, located in San Jose. As a student, Maria Luisa moved to the capital and stayed there for the rest of her life, though she kept close ties with her family, regularly visiting and staying in touch with them. In 2000, after completing her degree, she started working as an anesthesiologist at one of the largest medical centers in the capital. She quickly advanced in her career, constantly learning and improving her skills. By 2015, Cedeño had become the head of the anesthesiology and recovery therapy department. She was loved and respected by her colleagues and became quite a prominent doctor, though she achieved all this by sacrificing her personal life. For a long time, Maria Luisa was alone and completely devoted to her work. In 2017, when she was 40, she started a romantic relationship with a doctor from the same hospital, although he worked in a different department. She believed he was the love of her life, someone she could build a strong and happy family with. However, at the beginning of 2020, the couple broke up because he started seeing a younger colleague. For Maria Luisa, the breakup was a devastating blow. She fell into a deep depression and buried herself in work for months, barely noticing anything around her. Her only comfort was her little dog, Mofalti, who she treated like her child. The last vacation. In July 2020, Maria Luisa decided she desperately needed a break and a change of scenery before she lost her mind. At the time, the COVID-19 pandemic was spreading worldwide, and various restrictions were in place to slow the virus. She chose to head to the coast and stay at a small but cozy hotel called Le Mansion Inn, located in the scenic Punta Arenas. This resort is usually popular with tourists from all over the world, but with the pandemic and strict lockdowns, it was almost deserted. At the hotel where she checked in, only a few rooms were occupied. However, the peace and quiet were exactly what she was looking for. Maria Luisa planned to spend the weekend there and head home on Monday. She brought along her beloved dog, Mofalti. She stayed in a ground-floor room that had a second door leading to a private courtyard. These rooms were designed for travelers with pets so that the animals could go outside and take care of their business in a designated area. All the other rooms with courtyard access were empty at the time. On July 18th, Maria Luisa checked in, dropped off her things, and headed to the beach. The next day passed just as quietly. She strolled along the shore, sunbathed, had dinner at the restaurant, and then went back to her room. She called her mother, and they talked for about half an hour. Maria Luisa mentioned how empty the hotel was, with only a few staff members, most of whom were juggling multiple jobs. She planned to check out the next morning after breakfast, but she never made it that far. A lifeless body wrapped in a sheet. On the morning of July 20th, Maria Luisa didn't show up for breakfast. The hotel staff noticed this because there were so few guests, but they didn't think much of it, assuming she was just sleeping in before heading home. But when checkout time came and she still hadn't appeared, they decided to check her room. 2 staff members knocked on Maria Luisa's door, but there was no answer. They could hear her dog barking inside, so they knew she had to be there. They kept knocking and calling her name, but the only response was the barking. So they went around to the courtyard to see if they could reach her that way. The second door was unlocked, and the staff decided to enter to make sure everything was okay. As soon as they stepped inside, they noticed brownish stains on the floor that looked like dried blood, and on the bed, they found a body wrapped in a sheet. The hotel staff immediately called emergency services and informed the management. Unfortunately, the paramedics could only confirm that Maria Luisa was dead. She had been killed several hours before her body was found. Everything about the scene was strange, from the condition of the room to the circumstances of her death. The investigation begins. Maria Luisa's body showed multiple cuts, bruises, and bite marks left by different people. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought back fiercely. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxia and a broken neck. Someone had strangled her so hard that they broke her cervical vertebrae. The autopsy also revealed that she had been sexually assaulted before she died. Next to her bed, there was a bottle of mineral water, an open bottle of expensive wine, and 2 glasses. According to the maid, Maria Luisa had indeed ordered these items the night before, but she had been alone. The records of her key card showed that after receiving her delivery, she didn't leave the room, and no one entered. However, the glass door to the courtyard didn't require a key, so the attacker could have gotten in that way. The hotel had plenty of security cameras, which might have shed some light on what happened. But it turned out none of them had been working for months. The administration claimed that due to the pandemic and the drop in guests, they had cut costs by shutting off the cameras. Forensic experts tested the bite marks on Maria Luisa's body for DNA, hoping to find the killer's saliva, but the results were shocking. The saliva found in the wounds was her own. Because the bite marks were on her face, neck, and chest, where she could not physically reach, investigators concluded that the perpetrator intentionally stained the wounds with her saliva to cover his tracks. Another surprising detail came from the pathologist, who reported that her body had been thoroughly washed after death. This meant that after she was attacked, tortured, and strangled, the perpetrator or perpetrators took her body to the bathroom, washed her, then laid her on the bed, stained the bite marks with her saliva, and wrapped her in a sheet. Since the hotel's cameras weren't working and the place was almost empty due to the pandemic, no witnesses were found. None of the guests or staff reported seeing or hearing anything unusual, and no strangers were spotted on the property. The first suspect. News of the brutal murder of a well-known anesthesiologist quickly spread across the country, causing a huge public outcry. The police needed to solve the case as soon as possible and figure out who could have been so cruel to an innocent woman. When the victim's family was asked if she could have had a brief vacation fling, they were sure the answer was no. She was still heartbroken over her recent breakup and hoping for reconciliation. As for the 2 glasses found in the room, Maria Luisa's sister explained that she always used 2, one for wine and one for water. The forensic results confirmed this, as only the victim's fingerprints and lip marks were found on the glasses. During the interview with the police, Maria Luisa's mother suddenly recalled that during her last phone call with her daughter, Maria had mentioned a man who worked at the hotel. She said they had chatted during lunch, and he asked her why she was traveling alone and how long she planned to stay. This gave detectives their first suspect to question. That employee was 38-year-old Teodor Herrera Martinez, the son of a longtime friend of the hotel owner, Harry Bowden. In fact, thanks to his father's connections, Martinez had gotten the job at the hotel. He worked as a bartender and did personal errands for his boss. Right from the start of the interview, Martinez acted strange, very nervous, and claimed he didn't remember Maria Luisa or ever talking to her. Fresh scratches were clearly visible on his cheeks and neck, and he couldn't give a clear explanation of where they came from. When he was asked to remove his shirt, similar scratches were found on his chest and shoulders. Detectives suspected the victim had left those marks while fighting for her life, but they needed to wait for experts to confirm. Martinez was arrested, initially for 6 months, while the investigation continued. The second suspect. Forensics confirmed that blood and skin particles from Martinez were found under the victim's nails, but the bite marks on her body didn't match his dental impressions. The police continued to question hotel guests and staff until a 36-year-old man named Luis Carlos Miranda came into focus. He wasn't a regular guest and didn't work at La Mansion Inn, but he was a friend of the hotel owner, which allowed him to stay there for free. One of the bite marks on the victim's body could have been made by Luis, but it wasn't clear enough to be certain. Still, the police arrested him as a second suspect for 6 months, just like Martinez. Miranda, too, denied ever seeing Maria Luisa or having any contact with her. The third suspect. About a week and a half after the shocking murder, a third suspect was arrested, Harry Bowden himself, the 69-year-old hotel owner. It's worth noting that Bowden, a businessman of Dutch origin, had extensive connections with politicians and entrepreneurs and owned several properties in different countries. What led to his arrest was that one of the bite marks on the victim's body matched Bowden's dental impressions. It also came to light that around 6 months before the murder, Bowden had undergone surgery at the hospital where Cedeno worked. Despite Bowden insisting that he had never seen the woman before, Police believed he might have noticed her during that time, taken her contact information, and lured her to his hotel. Initially, due to his age and health issues, Bowden was placed under house arrest. However, when he suddenly changed his residence without notifying the police, he was taken into custody, as there were fears he might try to leave the country. There was a fourth person involved in the case, Bowden's young husband, a man named Yader Daniel Abanda. However, no evidence was found against him. Abanda denied involvement in the crime, claiming that his partner was not feeling well that night and did not leave their room. The investigation's theory. Once the autopsy and forensic results were in, investigators concluded that there were 3 attackers. There were no signs of ropes or restraints used to immobilize the victim, but all of her limbs showed bruises from fingers and palms, indicating she was held down by hand. In Maria Luisa's mouth, experts found fabric fibers and a thread, which suggested she had been gagged. This likely explained why none of the other guests or staff heard any screams, even though the victim's injuries and signs of torture showed she must have desperately called for help. In Maria's phone, found in her room, there were messages to her sister, where she praised the hotel, saying how beautiful, cozy, and quiet it was. She mentioned how attentive and helpful the staff was, and she even noted that she had spent the evening chatting and dancing at the bar with a man who served coffee and looked after the property. Based on the description, this was Martinez. From the beginning, Martinez was the prime suspect. He was the only one of the 3 suspects with visible scratches. His skin and blood were found under the victim's fingernails, and his biological material was found in her body despite attempts to wash it off. However, casts of his teeth did not match the bite marks on her skin. Since Maria Luisa hadn't left her room after returning that evening and hadn't let anyone in, investigators believed that the attackers entered her room through the door leading to the courtyard. She might have left it unlocked so her dog could go out, and since the neighboring rooms were empty, no one would have noticed. The attackers likely moved quickly. Once inside, they knocked Maria unconscious with a blow to the head, gagged her, and then tortured and assaulted her for several hours. When they were done, they strangled her so violently with their bare hands that they broke her neck. Afterward, they washed her body in the bathroom, placed it on the bed, and wrapped it in a sheet, contaminating the bite marks with her own saliva. The trial. All 3 suspects denied any involvement in the crime, each claiming they were asleep in their rooms that night. But there were no witnesses to confirm their alibis except for the hotel owner's husband, whose testimony was questionable from the start. However, strange text messages were found on the suspects' phones. In them, they shared disturbing intimate fantasies, and the day before the crime, they talked about a guest who was alone. The public trial didn't begin until September 2022, more than 2 years after the murder. 71-year-old Harry Bowden appeared in court in a wheelchair as his knee problems had worsened, making it difficult for him to walk. Right away, the prosecution faced challenges in proving the involvement of Bowden and Miranda. The evidence against them was mostly circumstantial. Text messages on their phones and dental impressions, which the defense argued should be dismissed because the bite marks weren't a perfect match with their dental records. The expert who was supposed to testify about the bite marks on the victim had been hired by Bowden's lawyer. This orthodontist flew in from Madrid and claimed that the marks found on the victim's skin weren't strong enough evidence and couldn't definitively link the suspects to the crime. The day after his testimony, the expert returned to Spain, but the prosecution questioned his credibility. A follow-up investigation revealed that this individual wasn't properly accredited and was only a so-called expert by name. His testimony was thrown out, but the prosecution still struggled to prove the connection between the 2 main suspects and the bite marks. The prosecution argued that a crime this brutal and calculated couldn't have been committed by just one person. They believed at least 3 people were involved in the assault and murder. The defense, however, challenged this, pointing out that one strong man could have carried out the crime alone. The verdict, the only undeniable evidence, was against Teodor Herrera Martinez. In addition to his semen being found inside the victim and his skin particles under her nails, investigators also found Maria Luisa's blood on both the outside and inside of his shoes, with the shoe prints matching those found at the threshold of her room and near the bed. As a result, Martinez was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 50 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. Given that he was 40 years old at the time of sentencing, this was effectively a life sentence. Martinez admitted that he had been intimate with the victim that night, but claimed it was consensual and insisted that someone else must have killed her after he left. Since there was no solid evidence against Bowden and Miranda, aside from the bite marks and text messages, their involvement couldn't be proven. Both men were acquitted and released in March 2023. However, in September of that same year, an appeals court reviewed a complaint filed by the victim's family and ordered the case to be reopened. By that time, though, both Bowden and Miranda had long since left Costa Rica. They fled the country as soon as they were released from court. Currently, they are living in the Netherlands, and even if the new trial finds them guilty, they won't face any punishment. This is because there is no extradition agreement between the Netherlands and Costa Rica, despite the severity of the crime. If Dave Krupa had known how his online dating would turn out, he would never have registered on a dating site. He would have continued to live his old life, with his girlfriend Amy Flora and their 2 children together. Maybe finally, he would have legalized the 12-year relationship after all. Especially since after the breakup, Amy and Dave remained good friends. Periodically, they spent vacations together with their children, fulfilling their parenting duties to perfection. That was in 2011, and by the summer of 2012, Dave was ready to start a new relationship. Only the man was not looking for any commitment, preferring to remain single. He wanted to get acquainted with women who would not mind a free relationship and did not make far-reaching plans. With such thoughts, he came to the dating site, a place where everyone is looking for something different. The modern world has brought with it new technologies that allow you to build communication at a distance, bypassing many nuances, the awkwardness of the first acquaintance, the appearance at the same time, the fear of being rejected. Now, to get acquainted with someone who is interesting to you, it has become simple. It is enough only to choose the intended partner by a set of characteristics specified by him in the questionnaire. Even leave the house for this unnecessary. However, who is hiding behind a cute avatar profile, it is not known, and whether he corresponds to those features that describe too. And the real goals of dating are not always voiced in advance and found out at later stages of the relationship. Cary Leah Farver was born on November 30th, 1974 in Macedonia, Nebraska, USA. Having a failed experience of previous relationships, she alone raised her son, Maxwell. At one time, the child was a reward as well as a challenge for her. Despite her great love for the baby, she once spent a month in bed, going into a deep depression. The child's care was provided by Cary's mother, Nancy Rainey. Difficult relations with the father of the child, unsettled living conditions, served as a reason for the appearance of a young 20-year-old woman such an acute psychological state. Doctors later diagnosed Farver with bipolar disorder. People with this diagnosis are like 2 sides of the same coin. The person falls into extremes. His mood becomes either too good or too bad. Euphoria, increased efficiency, extreme friendliness is replaced by a depressed state, bitterness, impotence, and so on. The disease greatly complicates the normal life of a person, but in the early 2000s, Cary's doctor was able to find such an effective treatment for her, after which she was able to live like other people. Whether she wanted to settle her personal life is a rhetorical question. On the one hand, absolutely. What woman does not dream of a worthy companion? On the other hand, why tie yourself to someone who may later become the cause of many worries and misfortunes? Cary grew up in a full loving family, had an active life position, engaged in sports, dreamed of devoting herself to medicine. However, dreams were not allowed to materialize. At the first practice in the medical college, where the girl entered, she lost consciousness at the sight of blood. Therefore, deciding not to risk neither her health nor the health of patients, she studied to become a programmer. In the fall of 2012 in the neighboring city of Omaha, Cary was offered a job on good terms. She couldn't turn down the prospects that lay ahead of her, so she accepted the offer. Since Max was in middle school, the boy did not want to change his familiar surroundings and move with his mother. He remained to reside with his grandmother in Macedonia. Cary Farver's friend, Amy Long, recalled that she couldn't help but be noticed. When she walked into a room, all eyes were on her and her radiant smile. Perhaps that's what Dave Krupa liked about her one November day in 2012. Cary met Dave at the auto repair shop where he worked. While looking at Cary's car, a Ford Explorer, he realized he was very attractive to this woman. "She's showing me something inside the car, and we're standing there and we're very close, and there was some tension," Dave later recalled. It didn't take long for the date to arrive, and it was afterward that they went up to Dave's house. Except that their privacy was marred by many calls and messages from a certain Liz, who later stopped by the man's apartment to pick up something left for her earlier. Dave explained to Cary that this was his former companion, Liz Golar, whom he met on a dating site about 6 months ago and had been dating for a while. He also explained that the woman was extremely clingy, which was the reason for their breakup. Cary was very understanding, so she wasn't confused when she saw another woman in the man's apartment. After all, everyone has their own handleless suitcase from the past that occasionally makes itself known. So Cary remained unfazed, but Liz was clearly upset to see a strange woman in Dave's house. 2 weeks after moving in, Cary began dating Dave. They had discussed their relationship with each other beforehand, agreeing only to a brief, unencumbered affair. Shanna, Elizabeth Golar, better known as Liz, was the first person Dave met online in 2012. Liz was born in 1975 in Michigan. Dave liked her at first. She claimed that she was also not looking for a serious relationship, especially since she was a mother, and most of her time should be spent on her children, not men. By the way, they both had children around the same age. Dave repeatedly noted that Liz was unlikely to be a real-life partner for him, since she was neither well-read nor educated, which was important in a relationship between a man and a woman. They had few topics of conversation, and the relationship emphasized more on the horizontal. Over time, Liz became interested in what Dave was doing in her absence, who he was seeing, to which the man repeatedly pointed out that they were in an open relationship and she shouldn't care. Dave also told her that she could behave as she wished, that he did not restrict her from dating other men. However, apparently Liz was not satisfied with this, and she began to pester Dave more and more. But most of all, Liz was jealous of Dave's children and their mother, Amy. She couldn't understand the warm relationship that remained between them after the breakup. Eventually, Liz's actions forced Dave to distance himself. Then Cary appeared on the horizon. Cary was beautiful, with style and intelligence. Dave could talk to her for hours. They matched on everything. "I felt like I hit the jackpot," Dave claimed. Liz, sensing that the man was pulling away from her more and more, began to remind him of himself with more activity. She wrote messages, emails, and called. However, he wasn't going to stop seeing Cary or anyone else for her. Soon, Cary and Dave were spending more and more nights together. Dave allowed himself to do this because it was convenient for Cary to get to work, and he enjoyed her company. Cary acted like she was not looking for something serious, but was just enjoying the moment, having fun. In December 2015, Liz was shot. The woman, in all likelihood, guessed who it was. As luck would have it, the wound turned out to be non-fatal. "This can't go on any longer. I have to do something about it," thought Liz. Leaving for work on November 13th, 2012, Cary kissed Dave and promised to see him later. That was the last time he would see her. At 9:45 a.m. while at work, Dave was very surprised by the contents of a text message from Cary. She texted him that she wanted to live with him and move in with him permanently. The correspondence was very disconcerting to Krupp. He could not understand Farver's sudden change of mood, as they had discussed this point beforehand. They had jointly decided that they would not rush into a relationship. They were happy as they were now. The message, however, told a different story. Dave gently replied that he wasn't ready for such a change. The counter-message from Cary was not pleasant. Lots of profanity, he described the message. I didn't know what to think. I was shocked. When he returned to the apartment, he found that all of Cary's belongings that she had brought to him were gone. Apparently, that's why he thought the woman had left him. That same day, Cary deleted him from her Facebook friends. That would seem to be the end of it. But no. Dave started receiving text messages and emails from Cary several times a day. They contained curses and threats to ruin his life. There were so many of them, and they were all rude. Cary also didn't show up for work, which was unlike her, since she was notable for her punctuality. Strange messages from Cary Farver were sent not only to Dave Krupa, but also to her mother and her 15-year-old son. She wrote that she had found a job in Kansas and planned to take Max. But for now, she wants to be alone as she is worried about her failed romance. In May 2013, Cary in her Facebook profile published a rather long post, which read, I've answered enough questions to prove to everyone that I've had enough. You can either believe I'm your daughter, mother, sister, and friend you've known your whole life, or just leave me alone. I left of my own free will, and I'm sick of everyone giving me a hard time for doing what I had to do. I don't miss it, I just don't want to go home right now. I'm a grown woman, and if I feel like leaving home, I have the right to do so. So when I'm ready to come home, I will. I'm sorry that after hurting everyone, I just up and left. Time passed, however. Cary never showed up. The woman's mother clearly realized something was wrong with her daughter when she missed her own birthday, as well as Max's birthday and other family celebrations. The final straw was her father's funeral. After a while, Liz Goler also started receiving messages from Cary. In them, she insulted and humiliated the woman, and some messages contained a threat to stay away from Dave. In order for the man to be able to explain such strange behavior of her friend, Liz decided to contact him. He told her that he was in exactly the same situation. Cary attacked him with messages and emails. In them, the woman accused her former lover of all sins, called him a lecher, and promised revenge for all the pain he had caused her with his response. Sometimes the messages were ominous in nature, telling her what Dave was up to at the moment. The fact that they were in the same position brought Dave and Liz even closer together. He felt even more guilty for the inconvenience he had caused her. Soon, the incessant messages from Cary became more threatening. The text was illogical and full of grammatical errors. Cary's mother insisted that her daughter had never been an angry person and that she had always written letters and other documents correctly. Cary was meticulous about spelling and style. Did Cary's bipolar disorder develop into something more after a second trigger? Could it be that she had experienced even greater mental abnormalities? There was no explanation for Cary's actions other than her uncontrolled mental state. The main sign of dissociative identity disorder, split personality, is the existence of a separate self-consciousness in each ego. At the same time, each of them has a different memory, thinking, behavior, and even inclinations to certain actions. Could this explain Cary's strange behavior and even her altered writing style? Everything pointed to the woman's instability. That's why the police didn't consider Cary Farver missing. Focused on stopping the pursuit of Liz and Dave, they tried to track Cary through her cell phone. But it was all in vain. The signals were being blocked. Liz and Dave were still receiving hundreds of texts and emails. Sometimes, even when they were together, their phones would receive nasty messages at the same time. The couple continued to date, but Dave felt uncomfortable around Liz. She became more demanding again, although she continued to claim that she was fine with their no-commitment relationship. Every time Dave fought with Liz and ended his relationship with her, Cary increasingly texted, "We were both victimized. Dave and I had something in common that we didn't have with anyone else," says Liz. Common problems brought the young people closer together, and they returned to each other again and again. In January 2013, Dave discovered the missing Cary's car in his front yard. Surprisingly, the fingerprints on the steering wheel did not belong to Cary, and in general, the car was clean. No suspicious traces were found in it. The police later turned the car over to Farver's parents. Cary continued to write to Liz and Dave. It got to the point where she started sending pictures of their children and threatening to hurt them if Dave didn't leave Liz alone. Time passed, but there were no results. Cary's manic stalking continued, and Liz annoyed Dave more and more with her jealousy as he continued to socialize with other women. He grew tired of what was going on in his life and finally found the strength to finally end his relationship with Liz. Soon after, another tragedy occurred. In August 2013, Liz Golar reported a fire in her home that killed all of her pets, including a snake, a cat, and 2 dogs. Liz told police she suspected Cary was responsible for what happened. The woman had threatened her repeatedly in her texts and emails. The incident marked a turning point in the case of the missing Cary. Cary Farver was put on a federal wanted list, and each of the tens of thousands of messages was decided to be studied in detail. Law enforcement seized cell phones from Dave and Liz. Krupa believed he was in danger too, so he bought a gun for protection. There was a reason for that. Someone vandalized the auto repair shop where he worked and threw a brick through his window. Cary seemed to direct his anger at anyone in Dave's life. After a while, the mother of his children, Amy Flora, also began receiving threatening messages from Cary. Since the man often spent time with his children, he often saw Amy as well. Police became suspicious. Why would a man who had dated Dave for less than 2 weeks for 3 years now stalk him and his ex-girlfriends? It just didn't make any sense. Cary Farver's relatives were also relentless, searching for the missing woman, plugging in every way they could to find her. And one day, in the spring of 2015, the efforts paid off. Detectives Ryan Avis and Jim Doty volunteered to solve Cary Farver's disappearance. They found no evidence that Cary was alive. Here's what one of them told ABC News. "It's not normal for adults to just pick up and leave without literally spending any money. No one saw her and no one heard her voice. It just doesn't make sense. She had a good income, a nice house. I've come to the conclusion that I can't prove that she's actually alive." With the help of Anthony Kawa, digital forensics administrator for the Potawatomi County Sheriff's Office, detectives reviewed content downloaded from Krupp and Golar's phones in 2013. Kawa said Cary Farver sent more than 50,000 texts and 15,000 emails to Dave over a 3-year period. Kawa added, "Whoever was impersonating Cary, that certain someone became more and more sophisticated in what they were doing, trying to hide their IP address, trying to hide their real identity. Somebody obviously knew what they were doing, knew all kinds of computer programs, at least had access to them." In December 2015, Liz Golar contacted the police again. She reported that she had been shot in the leg on the doorstep of her own home. According to her, it was not Cary, but Amy Flora. She was the one she recognized as her attacker. Dave was also missing a gun that Amy may have had access to. Could this woman be behind Cary's disappearance? There was a lead in the investigation. It explained why everyone connected to Dave Krupp was being harassed. It could well be that Amy, having failed to settle her personal life after the breakup with the father of her children, decided to take revenge in this way and eliminate all competitors. Especially since the relationship between Dave and Amy has always been not bad, the joint children brought them closer together, and foreign women clearly prevented them from getting back together. It didn't take long for the police to respond. Amy was questioned. However, to everyone's surprise, she had an alibi. She had not been at Liz's house at the time of the shooting. This was confirmed by several people, so no arrest was made. The investigation became more and more confusing. At the same time, new details became known from the specialists who were processing data from Liz's cell phone. Golar's phone contained a wealth of information. Kava discovered fake email addresses with different variations of Farver's name. Investigators also discovered an app she used to schedule messages to be sent at certain times. This could explain how she and Dave were receiving messages from Cary at the same time. Kava became suspicious of Liz Golar. The puzzle came together when Liz's fingerprints were compared to those found on the steering wheel of Cary's car. They were a perfect match. It became obvious who the culprit was. The killer had been around all these years, and there was no telling who else might have been affected by her actions. One thing was clear. The case had to be stopped as soon as possible. The only thing left to do was not to scare Liz away, or better yet, catch her red-handed. Something had to be done to throw the woman off balance. The detectives decided to make up a story about supposedly believing Liz, with Amy still being the prime suspect. Liz took the bait. She was overjoyed that she would finally be able to get rid of another rival that was interfering with her happiness with Dave. Shortly afterward, Liz Golar handed the police an email that she claimed was from Amy. In that email, Amy admitted to kidnapping Cary. It also contained details of the crime. The confession stated that Cary had been stabbed earlier in the stomach or chest area and then disposed of the body. Details from the letter also contained information about Cary's car and home, which were not made public. The details were chilling because they were graphic, an investigative spokeswoman said. Liz provided detectives with the kind of information that only a true criminal could possess. Thus, she inadvertently confessed to the murder of Cary Farver. It was clear from the letter that the crime had taken place in the car. Therefore, it was decided to examine the victim's car once again. After the specialists removed the seat covers and fabric, a bloodstain belonging to the disappeared Cary Farver was found. How did Liz manage to poison messages on Cary's behalf and yet remain above suspicion? Some sources claim that Liz Golar led a double life, dating both Dave and a man named Garrett. The latter lived on an IP address that was identified as the starting point of messages coming from Cary's name. In the course of communicating with him, it was revealed that he had been dating Shanna Golar, whom many knew as Liz, for a long time. Out of kindness, the man offered Shanna to move in with his children after the fire. However, the relationship between the two was complicated and deteriorated markedly after they began living together. Garrett would look after Golar's children while she secluded herself in her room or went somewhere else. It came as a big revelation to the man what police told him. Golar spent 40 to 50 hours a week pretending to be the missing woman. Her room was a mess, but no significant evidence was found. However, investigators did find several cell phones and electronics in the last apartment she occupied. In late December 2016, Shanna Golar was charged with first-degree murder. The county prosecutor spoke about the complexity of the court investigation. Most murders are dark. This crime was bizarre to the point where it would take some convincing to make someone believe it actually happened. There's no way someone would have let their dog die in a fire they set themselves. There's no way someone would have shot themselves in the thigh, yet Shanna Golar did it in order to deflect suspicion from herself. Shanna Golar's attorney, James Martin Davis, hoped the case would fall apart because it relied mostly on circumstantial evidence. Cary's body was never found, nor was the crime weapon, and Golar herself never confessed. There was no evidence that Cary had died at all. The defense team opted for a mistrial, meaning that the degree of Shanna's guilt would be determined by a judge, not a jury. Mountains of complex electronic evidence were presented along with physical evidence. However, the prosecution insisted that the amount of blood found on the passenger seat of Cary's car was consistent with a confession of stabbing from the IP address where Shanna lived. Investigators did establish Shanna's direct link to Cary's murder by analyzing the memory card she was using around the time Cary went missing. It was in a tablet that was stored in Dave's possession. Deleted images were recovered, including a photo of a human foot with a Chinese symbol tattooed on it. It was immediately obvious that the foot belonged to a man who had been dead for many years. In addition, among Cary's special features was a similar tattoo. Later, the woman's mother confirmed that the tattoo really belongs to her daughter. The photo confirmed Shanna Golar's conviction. The judge found her guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He said, "Cary Farver did not disappear voluntarily. It is very unfortunate that she was murdered." Authorities believe Shanna killed Cary, gave her body time to decompose, and then burned the remains to get rid of all evidence. Probably overstepping her bounds due to jealousy, she decided to get rid of her rival. After disposing of her, she purposely took her cell phone to make Farver look crazy and win back Dave's favor. When her plan succeeded, Shanna wanted to rid her lover of Amy as well. But she got so caught up in the game that she ended up falling into a trap of her own making. It's a bloody love square, to say the least. Golar was also found guilty of setting fire to her own home in August 2013, which she tried so hard to blame on Cary. Because the fire not only burned down the house but also killed pets, she received an additional 20 years in prison. The woman is currently incarcerated at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women. Shanna still maintains her innocence. Dave admitted that he has received thousands of emails and text messages signed by Cary over the years. However, he never noticed her stalking him when they were together, which cannot be said for Shanna. He also added, "I want her to leave and not do this to anyone else." Justice has been served. For a long time, Cary Farver's name was on everyone's lips. She was innocently accused of stalking people as well as burning Shanna's house down. Now Cary herself has been recognized as a victim, and her good name has been restored. Cary's mother wanted her daughter to be remembered as the fun, smart, talented woman she was. So what became of Cary's son, Maxwell Farver of Macedonia? According to his LinkedIn page profile, he followed in his mother's footsteps by becoming a computer programmer. He graduated from the University of Iowa with a degree in software engineering, data science, and got married. It's unlikely he was able to forget what happened, but he may have found peace in the family he created. Because of his past, Dave Krupa has now chosen to live away from the limelight. In fact, he doesn't even have a public account on any social media platform. The chilling crime story is a brutal reminder of the tangled complexities that can arise in human relationships, of all kinds of manipulation, sometimes going to extremes just to maintain control of the situation. It is a story about how defenseless we can be in our familiar surroundings without knowing the true nature of human beings.